Hello, everybody.
Hi, John.
How y'all doing?
Hi, John.
I'm tired. How about you?
Oh, I think I can make it.
Good.
You sound so cheerful.
Really?
Did you
That's
just have a
cheerful?
nap?
That's cheerful, Andrea?
Yeah.
I could be more cheerful than that. But not at 9 o'clock at night.
Did you just have a nap?
Was that a warning, John?
Yes, Mary. Yes, it was.
It's not up to us. We just listen. Okay, we do have a quorum, and I am going to call this Finance Committee meeting to order. It is 7 o'clock on April 29th. This meeting is being recorded. It will be available on YouTube. It's also being broadcast live. And I think I will go around and with a roll call. Starting with myself, Mary Hartman, I'm here. Christine.
Here.
Andrea Zoll.
Here.
Phil Swain.
Here.
Ray Andrews.
Here.
Greg Gariello. You're muted, Greg. Just Lois Wassoff.
Here.
Thank you. Dick Jamison.
Here.
Wade Rubenstein.
Here.
John Hickling.
Here.
Dee Ortner.
Here.
Parashar Patel.
Here.
And that's all I see from the FinCom. Actually, I just have a text from Dean Banfield, who can't get the credentials. I am going to I'm going to read out no, he's not here.
Mary, do you want to just send them the agenda that Carrie sent? If you click on that email, there's a link.
Just send them. Just send them the
You know what I'm going to do?
ID and passcode.
I'm going to start the meeting, and then once we get into the hearing, I'll go off for a minute and get him the credentials. Okay?
Mary, I'll
Yes.
take contacting Dean.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so I'd like to a motion to open up the hearing, please.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved.
Thank you. Let's go around and take a roll. Myself, Mary Hartman, yes. Christine Reynolds.
Yes.
Andrea Zoll.
Yes.
Phil Swain.
Yes.
Ray Andrews.
Yes.
Greg Gariello. Lois Wassoff.
Yes.
Dick Jamison.
Yes.
Wade Rubenstein.
Yes.
John Hickling.
Yes.
Dee Ortner.
Yes.
Parashar Patel.
Yes.
Dean Banfield.
Yes.
You made it. Great. And I think that's all we have from the FinCom so far. Okay, before we start the hearing, I'd like to make a few comments. Welcome, everyone, to the second hearing. It's the first of three that are going to be hosted by the Finance Committee. These are called hearings because they're really a chance for the sponsors to listen to the community to get input that they may use to modify their article. They'll use that input to write better materials for their handouts. And the comments and the suggestions from the public will also help both the FinCom and the Select Board to vote their recommendations relative to each article. So these hearings are very important to the process, and we welcome everyone who's here. As usual, the format will be there's a presentation of each article by the sponsor, and that will be followed by questions, comments from the audience. I need to say a word about the technology that we're going to be using. This is the second year that we're using the Zoom platform to host these hearings. I've been told by town staff that since we started using virtual Zoom public meetings, participation is actually greater than it was in 2019 when we had in-person hearings. This is good news. This is good news. So this is the good thing about the technologies. It really does seem to enable a lot more participation by people. However, the technology does have some limitations. We're going to be using a webinar format. And the webinar format, we've chosen that because it precludes bombing. And bombing is really a very disturbing thing that happens. It has happened recently to some town committees, and the webinar format enables or precludes that from happening to this meeting. What it does mean, though, is that not everyone will be seen. There are two groups of attendees. There are panelists and there are attendees. Panelists will be seen, they'll be heard, they'll be seen by everyone. Attendees will not be seen unless they have a question, and at that point, they will be elevated to become a panelist and they will be seen by everyone. If you have a question or a comment on any of the articles, the way to be heard, to be seen, is to type in a question in the Q&A. We're not going to use the raise hand function. We're going to use Q&A. So simply type a question into the Q&A. We're going to be monitoring the questions. We will get to you. We will elevate you so that you are seen and heard by everyone. I think that's about all I have to say. Thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for helping to keep Concord a strong democratic community. I am going to start with the first article.
Hi, Mary.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Do you just mind saying a word about Articles 18 and 19?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. On our agenda tonight, we are postponing Articles 18 and 19 we're moving those until May 11th because the presenters here had a conflict. So on our agenda tonight, 18 and 19 will not be heard tonight. It will be heard on Tuesday, May 11th instead. Thanks for that reminder, Chris. Okay, the first article on our agenda is meeting procedure. This is sponsored by the FinCom, and I will be presenting on behalf of FinCom. Chris, can you pull up that presentation quickly for me?
Yep, I'll load it up right now.
Thank you.
So, Mary, just while we're waiting, if I may, there was a comment in the Q&A that the attendees did not know how many people were participating. So I don't know if an attendee can see that there are 45 participants currently in this webinar.
Thank you, John. If you want to interrupt every so often and just give us a running count of how many people, I think that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, Article 3. I move that the town adopt a rule of the meeting resolution as printed in the handout applicable to this article. Next slide, please. The meeting procedure, the purpose is to hold spending within the constraints of Proposition 2.5. This is a routine article that we've had since 1992, and all appropriation articles will remain open and may be amended until the meeting adjourns. In a nutshell, it really is trying to make sure that any articles that are moved on the floor of town meeting don't go over Prop 2.5. Can I have the next slide, please? An appropriation is any motion to increase spending on any item above what's already proposed in the budget that's published in the warrant. If you have an increase, if you have an article that is requesting an appropriation, you have to outline the amount of the increase and the source of the funding. So the source of funding for anything outside of the budget articles already in the warrant would be a corresponding decrease in another item, asking for a Prop 2.5 override, or the use of other available funds such as free cash. Next slide, please. Appropriation, a reduction of borrowing is not a source of funding. So if someone moves an article on the floor of town meeting that is outside of what's been published in the warrant, they cannot use borrowing as a source of funding for that article. Borrowing is not the same as operating expenses. Next slide, please. Debt authorizations. Any motion to increase a borrowing item for which debt service is to be covered within the levy limit must specify the amount of the increase and, again, the source of the funding. For these types of articles, the sources of funding could be a corresponding reduction of other borrowings within the levy limit or a Prop 2.5 debt exclusion. Next slide, please. I move that the town adopt a rule of the meeting resolution as printed in the handout applicable to this article. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open it up to the FinCom to see if FinCom members have any questions relative to this specific article. Are there any questions from FinCom? Dean?
It's a simple question, and I think our finance can probably answer it. And that is, the way this is structured, one of the possible sources of funding is to ask for a Prop 2.5 override. But the town has a significant levy limit capacity well in excess of what might actually come as an appropriation request. So it doesn't sound to me as though someone were to ask for an additional appropriation. Let's say they wanted to increase something by $100,000. It would not actually put the town in a position to require a Prop 2.5 override because we have a lot of levy limit capacity. So I'm not quite sure how those things interact, and maybe someone in the finance department could clarify that for me.
Carrie, do you want to take that?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, I want to say the presentation is pretty generic. It's one we've been using for years and years. It probably could be a little more crisp, but I would agree with you. As long as the moderator ruled additional spending within the four corners of any article, there certainly are sources of funding that are available that would not require an overlay. An override.
So just to clarify that, if someone were to specify they'd like another 100,000 added to a specific expenditure, the effect of that, if they couldn't specifically identify a place where the money was coming from, would be that the tax levy would rise. But our tax levy is in no danger of rising to the point of hitting 2.5. So I'm not quite sure about the effect of this need to find an offset, because we're not in danger of bumping up against our cap. That's the only reason I'm asking this question.
Yeah, so I do think the purpose is for the maker of the motion to identify the source of funding. So it's up to whoever is making the motion to identify. It's not for somebody else to identify. So we certainly could work on the presentation to make it a little more clear in the event that somebody wanted to add an appropriate.
So I guess what I'm saying is, if they were to identify the source of the funding as additional tax levy, I see that as being valid, mostly because we're not in danger of any kind of 2.5 proposition problem. So I'll stop there. It just feels like this shell game of having to find offsets is only necessary when you're in danger of the tripwire of Prop 2.5.
I would just say, I do think it is important, and the moderator certainly could weigh in. It is important for the maker of the motion to identify the source of funding. That is my understanding. Sure. That is a requirement.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions from the FinCom? I'm going to open it up now to the broader audience. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes. So we have one from Carmen, just asking that we reference that the material, the handout that's referenced is something that will be available at town meeting. So there's a reference apparently in this article to a handout.
Actually, I think I'm going to try to say, I think what Carmen is saying is that earlier when I said the reason we have these hearings is to give input to the sponsors. And I think some of that input will be used for them to write up explanations of their articles that will be included in the handout pertaining to the and it will be printed in the town meeting materials booklet. So okay. I hope, Carmen, that's what you were suggesting that we do.
Okay.
Right.
And then Matt Johnson has a question. I'll read it out and maybe we can promote him. So under what condition would a request to increase an appropriation be considered within the scope of an article?
Actually, Chris, can we elevate people who have a question right now? There he is, Matt.
Yeah, and actually, I don't need elevation as much as I just need an answer. My sense is that most articles that have a financial component to increase the appropriation would also increase the scope and basically take it out of the scope of the article. So I'm just curious under what circumstances you could request an additional appropriation and still be within the scope of an article.
Mary, I'm here if you'd like me to help with that.
Go ahead, Carmen, thank you.
Carmen Reese, 52 Devon Street, Town Moderator. And if there's an increase, if a proposed amendment to a motion under an article proposes an increase in spending, the question of whether or not that proposed amendment is within the scope of the original article really depends on whether adequate notice. We always have in our warrant articles the little magic words wiggle room of or any other sum or take any other action relative thereto. So that gives us a little bit of wiggle room, but it does not allow a wholesale change in a budget item. You would not allow, for example, a doubling. If an article is to buy 1 fire truck, it does not allow a motion to buy 2 fire trucks. And this is a real-time decision for the moderator to make on whether or not a proposed amendment would be within scope. And I would say that tweaks are generally speaking within scope. Wholesale changes are not. And obviously, there's a little bit of gray area where there's a judgment call, and the judgment call is the moderator's to make.
So would that normally be because of maybe an error or just a change of conditions, that would just yield a different result? So let's say an interest rate change that would result in, an appropriation amount needing to be higher, but not something that was under the control of the board or committee that was proposing the article.
Well, I think, Mary, we should be going through the chair here. So may I respond to that?
You're on mute, Mary.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Yes, I would say that something like a change in interest rate would certainly be in the category of a tweak, but you could have, for example, a motion to amend the town budget to add a line item, which in the relative, relative to the total amount of the town budget might not be a significant enough change for it to be out of scope, or it might be out of scope. So that's why I say there's kind of a judgment call on those kinds of things. It can happen also if, for example, we have had some of these things in the past where there may be a particular methodology that is proposed for remedying a landfill situation. And if you were going to do a different approach, it might cost a little bit more money. And if it's not a lot more money, then it's probably fine and within the scope of the article. But if it represents a wholesale change because it is a significant amount more that would have, for example, brought out different people to come and be concerned and wish to weigh in and vote on the article, then it's out of scope. So I realize that's a little mushy, but this is the nature of scope calls. And some moderators use kind of a rule of thumb, like 5 or 10% in either direction, but I don't really use that because 10% of $100,000 is really different than 10% of $10 million. So I wouldn't use that as a rule of thumb. It really, the touchstone is notice. And if the change is significant enough that people would feel they didn't have adequate notice by the warrant the article as printed in the warrant, then it's a problem. And I would rule it out of order.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Matt. Chris, do we have any more questions?
Not specific to the article, and I think we addressed the questions about the meeting format. There is an individual had a couple more questions on that if you want to speak to it.
About the format, the technology that we're using?
Correct. Right.
Okay, some people might have come in later, so I think this is worth repeating. We've chosen to use a webinar format as opposed to a meeting format. And we've chosen the webinar format because it precludes bombing. And bombing is where people interfere or insert themselves into the meeting. And it's a very disturbing occurrence, and it has occurred on other meetings in town. So the webinar format is a more secure format. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is that we're not going to be able to see everybody. You can be seen if you want to speak and you're recognized by the chair, and we can do that. But in the meantime, not everyone is going to see everybody. And the other thing I think is John is going to every so often tell us how many people are in attendance so we can get a feel for that. So that's the best we can do with the technology that we've got. And hopefully next year we'll all be in the new townhouse. So this will go away.
48 participants, Madam Chair.
How many?
48.
Thank you. Okay, if I hear no more questions on...
Wait, I had one more. So someone asked why we cannot make the participants button available. I don't know what that is.
I
Do you know, Chris, what that is? I don't know what the Oh, you mean the number of participants? Yeah, I maybe Chris Carmody can answer why they can't see the number of participants. It's 48 at the moment. We just have a counter.
We've enabled this setting on the webinar so that attendees can see the number of people in this meeting. But if they can't see it, we can try and look at that a little bit closer after the webinar.
Okay, so I think that it would be good if people can see the count. And Diana Proctor would like to speak. Can we show Diane, pardon me.
Yeah. Diane, you're on the panel.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to be persistent about this, but actually I've run Zoom meetings with over 100 people where we've worried about Zoom bombing, but if you have somebody managing it on the other side, you can neuter a Zoom bomber rather efficiently. And to call something a public meeting where we can't see the participants' names. We can now see the participants' names. Thank you. We couldn't before. Is really makes it not a public meeting, does it, or a public hearing? It makes it a webinar, precisely that, which is where the audience sits and watches. Thank you for putting on the participants. That's very much appreciated, and I think that's answered my biggest question. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane.
There are ways, Mary, to make this work. So we might speak offline. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I might ask that you have anyone who speaks identify themselves by name and address. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen.
Sorry, Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road, Concord. Thank you. I'm sorry, I should have done that. And thank you, Christine.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions on Article 3?
Let me just make sure I've got it all here, Mary. The participants we talked about. So on the participants button, Chris Carmody, so we cannot see the participants button, only the speakers can see it. And it sounded like Diane could see something. So I know at least one person still can't see that. So maybe in the background, I'll ask Chris to work on that. Okay. And
that would be great. Christine, let's try to keep the technical questions in the background for now.
Yep.
Going forward, we will look at other ways we can run the meeting, but for tonight, we're going to keep the webinar format.
No, we have no other questions on the article.
Thank you. Can we move to Article 4? Chris Carmody, can you please?
Pull it up now.
Thank you. Again, this is sponsored by the Finance Committee, and I will be representing it on behalf of the Finance Committee. Thank you. Article 4 is to determine whether the town will vote to replace the policy established in Article 4, just so happens it's the same number, of the 1976 annual town meeting relative to establishing and publishing the budget guideline. Next slide, please. Here's a copy of what the 1976 town meeting agreed to. The Finance Committee shall annually establish a guideline for budget increases to be considered in the fiscal year planning by the Board of Selectmen, the Concord Public School Committee, and the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee, and will publish said guideline in the local press prior to November 30th of the previous fiscal year. That is the article from 1976. Here's what we're proposing. Next slide, please. I think we missed a slide. Go back, please. No, okay. I thought there was another slide in there. That's okay. Okay, so we're in, the proposed article is that the Finance Committee will establish a budget guideline for the next fiscal year for the Select Board, the Concord Public School Committee, and the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee, and will publish said guidelines on the town website no later than 5 weeks before the scheduled close of the warrant. Next slide, please. Here are the substantive changes between the 1976 article and what we're proposing tonight. The first is the date for publishing is now relative to the scheduled closure of the warrant instead of a fixed date on the calendar. All the other dates are established relative to town meeting. The guideline publishing date is the only one that is tied to a specific date on the calendar. So what we're doing is we're now making this in line with all the other dates, which will be relative to town meeting. Guidelines is now plural, since in practice, separate guidelines are given to each entity based on their budget drivers. The guidelines will be posted on the town website instead of the local paper. Recent town survey results indicate that this is the means by which most people get information. I want to say here that this does not preclude us from also publishing it in the Concord Journal, but we will primarily publish it on the town website. And the last change is that selectmen is replaced by the phrase select board. And I think that's it. Is that it? So great. Okay, any questions from the FinCom? Since we sponsored this, I don't think we should have many questions. I will open it up to questions from the public. Do we have any questions, Chris?
We do not.
Very good. Oh wait, we do we? No, we don't. Okay, great, thank you. I think we can move on now to the other articles. The next article, I believe, is Article 5, Ratify Personnel Board Classification Actions. And who is here who's the sponsor of this? Is this?
Personnel Board.
I'm Bill Moracek, the chair of the Personnel Board.
Hi, Bill. And Amy?
Yep, Amy Foley, HR Director, is here too.
Great. So now who's going to, do you have a presentation for us?
Yes.
I'll load it up now.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Bill Moracek. I live at 64 Rollingwood Lane, and I am the present chairperson of the Personnel Board. Article 5, we're going to talk about to ratify the Personnel Board classification actions. Article 5, as reflected in the warrant, reads to determine whether the town will vote to ratify the Personnel Board's actions to amend the classification and compensation plan as follows, or to take any other action relative thereto. And I don't know, Mary, if you want me to read the items that are contained in the warrant, or we move forward.
Well, how long is that, Bill?
No, it's relatively short.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So the first is number one, move the public information and communications manager from grade MP2 to grade MP4 effective December 1st, 2020. Second, add the title Library Innovation and Communications Specialist to grade MP1 effective December 1st, 2020. Number three, add the title Land Manager to grade MP2 effective December 8th, 2020. And to make all other changes to the classification and compensation plan voted by the Personnel Board between March 26, 2021 and June 13th, 2021.
Thank you. Amy, do you have anything you're going to add to this?
No, I'm just here if there are questions after Bill does the presentation.
Great. So Bill, are you ready for questions?
Well, we've got several more slides, Mary.
Oh, sorry. I thought you, go ahead.
So Chris, can you move to, this article requests town meeting approval of classification actions taken by the Personnel Board during the past year. A classification action is an amendment to the town's classification and compensation plan that adds or deletes a job title, assigns a job title to a salary range, or reassigns a title from one salary range to another within the plan. The existence of the title on the plan does not determine whether the position will be funded. Funding for positions is subject to the limitations of the approved general fund and enterprise fund budgets. Next slide, Chris. Classification actions become necessary throughout the year when the town manager creates a new position, when the dates of an existing position change in a significant manner, or when it is determined that a position title needs to be updated. Next slide. In accordance with the Personnel Bylaw, the Personnel Board assigns titles and salary ranges as needed throughout the year and puts them into immediate effect. Salary grade assignments are determined by using the town's standardized classification system, which groups positions by assigning weighted points to common occupational features and distinguishing characteristics such as the nature of the work, the level of the work, job requirements, job qualifications, and working conditions. In the event the Personnel Board determines that a new or changed position requires an amendment to the classification and compensation plan, the board temporarily authorizes the change pending ratification at the next town meeting. Next slide. Since 2020, or since the 2020 town meeting, the Personnel Board authorized the 3 changes to the classification plan that are printed in the warrant and subject to ratification. The regrading of the public information and communications manager position reflects an increase in responsibilities and complexity of the position that is developed, particularly due to Minuteman Media Network operations. The addition of 2 titles to the plan for library and natural resources operations reflects the classification of new positions funded by prior town meetings. And the last slide. These actions, as intended by the Personnel Bylaw, maintain appropriate job titles and salary ranges in order to attract and retain competent employees, comply with equity laws, and prolong the life of the classification and compensation plan, thereby reducing the need for comprehensive studies that are both costly and labor intensive. Accordingly, they are presented to the town meeting for ratification. And I will open for questions.
Thank you, Bill. Does the Finance Committee have any questions for Bill or Amy? Yeah, Dee.
Hi, thank you. I question I don't question this. The expertise for these classifications resides with the Personnel Board. and are subject to the ratification at town meeting. So I question why this is coming before the Finance Committee, this article.
I don't have a good answer for that. Maybe Carrie can. I think it's always been that way. Maybe it shouldn't be. Carmen, maybe you can help me.
The Finance Committee has a very broad charge, which is to give advice to town meeting on all matters which have a financial impact on the town. And clearly how much the employees are paid has a financial impact on the town. So that would be the reason why this article is within the Finance Committee's purview.
Thank you.
I still don't understand why, I don't have an expertise on whether or not this classification should be changed or what the categories of compensation. I don't have that, and the categories of compensation, which is in the next article. So I just wonder, of what value is it? And if it's just a formality, should that be addressed?
So let me make sure I understand your question, Dee. You're saying why is it in the Finance Committee's public hearing, whereas it could be maybe in the Select Board's public hearing?
Well, that's probably a better place to put it, or an alternate place to put it. I just think, we don't set compensation per se. We don't set the ranges in which someone can be classified, and changing someone's classification is not really germane to how much that person is going to be paid based on what we say the person is going to be paid.
No, you make a really good point, but that's not the question in front of us tonight. The question, what we're doing tonight is we're just hosting a discussion. So
won't we have, because it falls under finance, won't we have to make some recommendation?
We may based on what we hear tonight. But I don't know. In the past, I don't know whether we have or not. But that is a discussion that we will be having after this meeting. What we're doing right now is we're hosting the conversation about it.
Okay.
So I hear your concerns, but that's something that we can discuss later in our FinCom meeting immediately following tonight's hearing.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the FinCom? I have a question. So let me make sure I understand this. So before town meeting ratifies some of these job descriptions and these salary ranges, they're basically on hold. Is that accurate?
So the personnel bylaw allows the personnel board to approve the actions, and then they can go into effect at that time. But they're still subject to ratification, which makes it a bit awkward for the employees, because there's always that question of, did we just hire somebody or make a job offer or move their title, put it into effect, and then what would happen if town meeting didn't ratify it? So these very questions that you're talking about are directly related to a different warrant article that you may or may not be familiar with. It's, it's Article 7. And it's really the question, in Article 7 has to do with the personnel bylaw and these types of procedures and who should have the authority for approving class and comp and what in order. So,
thank you, Amy. Any other questions from the FinCom? Okay, I'll open it up. Any questions from the public on this particular article? Chris, do you see any?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, we have 3 questions from participants. So first one is from Matt Johnson, and it's regarding retroactive approval of changes. So I'll let him ask the question. Can we bring him up?
Yep, I'll grab him.
Matt, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Matt Johnson, 21 Winthrop Street, member of the select board. I just was trying to follow up on the select board hearing on Tuesday night, and now just realizing that these can be passed retroactively. One of the major reasons that this bylaw change of Article 7 that was presented on Tuesday night was motivated by the need to wait until town meeting to make these changes. And I wasn't aware at that time that we had this procedure in place that seems to actually mitigate the impact of that. That it seems like we have a pragmatic way to wait and have town meeting ratify these changes. But I guess that's a matter for the select board hearing, but it's only tonight that I heard those details to really understand the scope of Article 7 and the impact or lack thereof.
Do you mind if I just respond to that?
Sure.
Sorry if that wasn't clear from the presentation the other night. It's about finalizing. When is it final? And so classification and comp can be something that happens a year after an action that the personnel board approves. And as I mentioned, that's a very long time to have an employee not know what town meeting is actually going to do, or whether it's going to be reversed. They're accepting a position, they're taking a promotion, whatever it might be. And what would happen if town meeting said no? It would have to be reversed in some way or stopped then, and that's very difficult. So it's not final until.
But in the interim, they are being paid at those rates, right?
They are.
They have that title.
They are.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, Mary, go ahead.
The next question, Chris?
Yeah, so the next question is from Terry Ackerman. And Terry asks, in item 4 of this article, why is the date March 26, 2021 instead of the date of the last town meeting? And we can promote Terry, but that's her question.
Sure, I can answer that one as well. That's when the warrant articles were due. So we print everything that we know up until the warrant article deadline. But then if there are actions that happen after the warrant article is submitted and before we get to town meeting, we try to address those in the interim so that we don't have to wait yet another more than 12 months to address it.
Does it? Okay.
Terry, you're on the panel if you want to.
You have anything? Sounds like she's okay. And then lastly, Henry Dane had a question similar.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I missed the entire response because in order to promote me, I had to come off and get rejoined.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you for asking the question. I didn't hear the answer.
Okay, sorry.
To repeat it. So the March was the date that the warrant articles were due. So we print every change up until the point we have to submit the warrant article to be printed. And then if additional actions happen between the warrant article deadline and town meeting, we want to be able to address those rather than wait more than a year or another year to actually finalize classification actions for the employees.
Okay, I think I understand. So what you're saying is everything that happened that the Personnel Board voted before March 26th is contained in Article 6, the next article we're going to be doing, and printed in the warrant.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Are you okay, Terry? You got your.
Yeah, thank you.
We also have a question now from Henry Dane.
Yes, it's similar, I think, to Matt Johnson's question, but happy to have Henry be promoted and have him ask it himself.
Chris, can you bring Henry into the panel?
Mr. Dane, you are on the panel. I've asked for him to open up his mic and camera.
When somebody's promoted, it takes a minute, it reboots.
I think I'm there. I think I'm there. I do. What I want to say is following up on the issue that Matt raised, and I think it's important to note that this explanation of the effect of the interim changes that are possible to the personnel structure between town meetings is very different from the explanation that was given with regard to Article 7 when that was discussed previously. There was no mention of any flexibility that existed between town meetings. And I think it's very important, perhaps not with regard to this article, because this article just gives describes how it actually works. But I think it's important to keep in mind that this really takes away a large portion of the rationale that was presented for the deletion or the changes to the personnel bylaw under Article 7. Thank you.
Henry, before you leave, I just got a reminder. Can you please identify yourself?
Henry Dane, thank you. Henry Dane, 58 Everett Street.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other questions from the public?
Can I respond to Mr. Dane?
Absolutely.
I hear Mr. Dane's point. I think that the reality of accepting a job in good faith and then having the possibility that that job is going to go away, it would make me uncomfortable to accept a job and to be knowing that for some good reason, bad reason, whatever reason, the town meeting may disapprove. So if I had two job offers, one that was going to have to wait for a town meeting versus one that has already been approved, I, as an individual, would be inclined to want to accept something, especially if I have little risk.
Thank you.
Can I also comment?
Please, go ahead.
The other thing under the other article is we were talking about the entire personnel bylaw and the types of changes that can be made. And so that goes beyond just the class and comp schedule. And so other changes in the bylaw, to wording, whether it be something related to types of leave, vacation, personal leave, that sort of thing, cannot change midstream. We don't have that, so we have to wait. So questions about that maybe came up during COVID on things that we wanted to address with leave. We had to get creative there. And a long-term example had to do with, well, actually, you know what, I'll go off because that's more about Article 7, so I don't want to take up everybody's time on the wrong subject. But
okay, seeing no more questions for this article, I think we can move on to Article 6.
Again, I'm Bill Moracek, 64 Rollingwood Lane, the chairperson of the Personnel Board. Article 6, we're going to talk about classification and compensation plans for regular status positions. Article 6, and Chris, if you can bring up the first slide, please. Article 6, as reflected in the warrant, reads, to determine whether the town will vote to amend the classification and compensation plan for regular status town positions by adopting the following schedules to become effective July 1st, 2021, or take any other actions relative thereto. And please refer to the warrant to see the proposed schedules. They consume several pages in the warrant. Slide 2. All right, so the purpose of this article is to amend in accordance with the personnel bylaw the classification and compensation plan for non-union regular status town positions effective July 1st, 2021. This action impacts approximately 60% of the town's regular workforce and less than 15% of the total workforce when school and non-regular employees are considered. Slide 3, please. The purpose of this article is to amend in accordance with the let's see here, 3. It is important to note that Article 6 does not control how much money will be allocated to employee salaries and salary increases in fiscal year 2022. Actual salary increases are set by the town manager and personnel board after town meeting within the limits of the approved general fund and enterprise fund budgets. Article 6 approves job titles, groupings of positions into grades, and salary ranges. Next slide, please. Adoption of the classification and compensation plan printed in the warrant would, number one, incorporate the classification actions set forth in Article 5. 2, increase all salary range margins by 2%. 3, further increase any range minimum over $13.50 an hour to the new Massachusetts minimum wage and adjust midpoints accordingly. Number 4, remove the titles of Public Works and Engineering Director and Chief Information and Telecommunications Officer. And 5, remove the TM for salary grade. The town manager and human resources director recommend these amendments to the plan based on current and anticipated workforce needs, continuing review of the compensation provided by similar municipalities, light plants, fitness facilities, and other employers with comparable positions to Concord's, and continuing review of equal pay for comparable positions. Next slide. As previously mentioned, town meeting action on Article 6 affects salary ranges, but does not control the amount of the actual salary increases to be received by employees in fiscal year 2022. Accordingly, there is not a direct cost associated with adoption of this plan. Actual salary increases are set by the town manager and personnel board after town meeting within the limits of the approved budgets and the fiscal year. Therefore, if Article 6 is approved by the town meeting, but funding for salary increases is not available in the approved budgets, the salary range limits will increase while each employee's actual pay will not. Likewise, if Article 6 is not approved by the town meeting, employees may still receive salary increases within the existing range limits, provided that funds for those increases are available within the approved budgets. And the last slide, please, Chris. In conclusion, with the understanding that maintaining fair and competitive salary ranges for the town's non-union positions is an important factor in attracting and retaining competent employees, the Personnel Board will make recommendations at town meeting for updates to the classification and compensation plan. Questions?
Thank you, Bill. Any questions from the Finance Committee? Dean?
Simple question. In this article, we are removing 2 classifications. One's a public works director and the other's a telecommunications person. And so those classifications get deleted in this article. Why aren't they in the other article in which we are either adding or reclassing things? What makes deleting something, like a different action?
Really about timing. Those positions aren't needed anymore. July 1 is when we update the entire schedule. Mid-year, we take action on things that really need attention right then. So since nobody was in it, we weren't using those. There was no need to take a mid-year action. So we could wait for the schedule for July 1 that's voted as a whole.
Okay, I'm still a little lost. So there's like a timing issue. It sounds like that these 2 articles are timed a little differently. Is that what you're saying, Amy?
Right. The first one is about actions that it's felt are needed to be taken during the course of the year. And so an interim action is taken and then it's got to be ratified. But there was no need to do anything in the middle of the year for positions that were vacant and aren't needed. So we addressed that with the full schedule.
Thank you.
Wade, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, just an explanation of the 2% across the board increase. What's the thinking behind that? And certainly within the labor market, the value of labor varies across the entirety of the labor market and changes annually. So I'm just wondering what's the thinking, and is that published in the guideline?
we have a wide variety of positions, and you're right, with different types of markets. We also have obligations to look at equitable pay under the Massachusetts law and try to keep positions that are similar in nature, comparable within the same ranges. And that's challenging. There are years that we make more dramatic types of changes where we might recommend that a certain group or range change more than the same across the board amount. But the 2% this year, as I understand it, and the town manager or finance director might want to comment more, is what we felt that in the current situation under the budget situation that we have, that is what the town could afford. And to, in a year of a pandemic with lots of change and lots of budget constraints, to do something that was varied throughout different ranges didn't make a lot of sense. So it's trying to be consistent and get us through this year. And then there is, we are taking steps to implement a full classification and compensation study to kind of reassess where we're at going forward.
Does that answer your, Wade? Are you okay with that? Great. Thank you, Amy. Parashar, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Mary. I'm curious, these timing questions, is it because of the timing of the town meeting this year, or are these timing questions always there every year?
Every year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the Finance Committee? Seeing none, I'll open it up to the broader audience. We've got 50 participants right now. Any questions? Christine, do you see any?
Nope, we don't have any.
Wait a minute. Okay, great. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Amy. We'll move on to the next article, which is the use of free cash. And I believe, Carrie, you are going to talk to this article.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Carrie LaFleur. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the town. This article seeks town meeting authorization to transfer $1 million from free cash for the purpose of reducing the tax rate. Next slide. Free cash is the town's undesignated fund balance. It is generated when actual revenue collections exceed estimates or when actual expenditures are less than appropriations. Free cash is certified each year by the Department of Revenue, and it is available for appropriation after certification at any regular or special town meeting. Next slide. Oh, one back. Are you on slide 3? Okay. The town has adopted a financial policy which states that free cash should be maintained at a level of 5 to 10% of the general fund budget, that it should only be used to provide property tax relief, that it should only be used to the extent that it can be replenished in the following year, and that if it rises above 10%, as it often does, but not currently, the town shall consider using the excess for a capital item or deposit the excess into a stabilization fund. Slide 4. This chart shows the amount of certified free cash for the last 12 years. During this period of time, certified free cash has ranged from its current low of 5.5% to a high of 12.8%, which occurred in fiscal 16. Slide 5. The town's certified free cash as of June 30, 2020 is $6,398,206, which is well below the policy maximum of $11.56 million. Due to timing issues directly and indirectly related to the COVID-19 pandemic, the current certification is $1,461,265 lower than it should be, Unfortunately, these receipts were not received until after the cutoff of September 30th, and therefore could not be included in the certified amount. Had they been counted, the free cash certification would have been $7,859,471, or 6.8% of the general fund budget. Fortunately, these receipts have been received and they will be included in the next certification, which will occur on June 30, 2021. This slide shows what our free cash will be, assuming that both free cash appropriations being sought at the 2021 annual town meeting are approved. That's at the bottom half of the slide. If both are approved, the town's free cash will be reduced to just below 4.9 million, which is 4.24%. So obviously very low for Concord and below the policy requirements. However, a one-time dip will not be a cause for concern with our rating agency, as the town's bond rating takes into account all reserves, both unrestricted, which is free cash, and restricted, which are stabilization funds and other trust funds. Final slide. Again, this article is seeking town meeting appropriation to transfer $1 million from free cash to reduce the property tax levy in fiscal 2022.
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions? My first question is, why is my name on that article? Just joking. Is any other questions from the Finance Committee relative to this particular article? Okay, seeing none, I will open it up to the greater audience, and I see a question from Carlin Reed. Chris, can you make Carlin a panelist, please?
Hi,
Great,
Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. I think the question's been asked, but just to be crystal clear, will allocating $1 million from free cash for tax relief prevent us from allocating $500,000 for affordable housing, which is a subsequent article number 17? That's it.
Carrie, you want to get that, or you want me to?
Sure. No, I'm happy to answer that. I appreciate the question. So I do think, if the strict interpretation of the policy, I think would say no, because that just the $1 million will take us to the bottom of the policy. However, I put the information in about the timing issue because I think you can make a reasonable and rational case that but for these unfortunate events, which have already resolved themselves because these receipts are in hand now, that you could take that into account and say, effectively, our free cash, we would still be within our policy if you take into account those receipts.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Christine, do we have any questions that I'm not seeing? No? Okay. Okay, seeing no questions, let's move on to the next article, please. Next article is the FY21 budget line item adjustments. Carrie, you're the sponsor of this.
Actually, Mary, this is Stephen Crane, Town Manager. I'll be taking this one.
Okay, go ahead, Stephen.
Well, I should say I'll be leading the presentation, but obviously Carrie and I, I'm sure she'll chime in and bail me out if needed.
Go ahead.
So you see the motion that the town transfer the sum of $40,000 from line 1 general government and $150,000 from line 3 finance for a total of $190,000 appropriated under Article 10 of the 2020 annual town meeting to line 2 legal services. Next slide, Chris. Unlike other operating budgets, schools, and enterprise funds, the town's budget is appropriated by town meeting in 16 distinct line items, and lines 1 through 12 appropriate what's commonly referred to, as you all know, the guidelines budget. 13 through 16 appropriate would refer to fixed costs or, cost share between town schools. And then, once those lines are appropriated, the town manager then must manage to the bottom line of each of those line item appropriations rather than to the bottom line appropriation, which is the case with the school and the enterprise funds. So it's a different standard, as you all know. Adjustments to the town's budget are only allowed by further town meeting action, which is what we're requesting here, or under the authority of MGL Chapter 44, Section 33B. Which we can talk about in a little bit. So next slide, Chris. So the budgets are prepared well in advance of the fiscal year. And, we talked about this, I think we've talked about this particular issue a number of times, but we are, it's a guess ahead. And we do the best we can, but often circumstances do change throughout the fiscal year. And so you see the proposed adjustment that I stated in the motion. And there are amounts to make these transfers largely due to vacant positions. And the amounts are needed in legal services to cover additional and unanticipated expenses. And just to clarify, the approval of this transfer does not increase the total appropriation for FY21 that we received under the budget article for FY21. So, sorry, Chris, next slide. So just to give you a little bit of historical perspective, we went back about 5 years with the note that these are just through March 31st for the FY21 lines. And you can see that the legal services are divided into three basic categories: general, litigation, and labor. If you saw town council's presentations to the select board back in January, he did go through some level of detail about Anderson Krieger, town council's costs and some of the things they've been dealing with. Some of those fall into general and some fall into litigation. There was a little bit of litigation work related to the library project, but most of the litigation obviously is related to the town's ongoing Estabrook Woods. So you can see here, compared to past years, it goes up and down, and there are variations in the three categories. As you can see, even compared to FY20, general is still under. Litigation is less than it was tracking for last year, and then labor is up quite a bit. So, and like I said, there are different reasons why these three categories go up and down. A lot of it is circumstantial. And I would note that many things that happen that drive the legal services budget are really things that were, kind of either actions by others or circumstances beyond the town's control. I'll give you an example. In the general legal services, both town council and labor council had to provide additional guidance to the town. Some of that's reimbursable, some of that is not. So that did drive up some of the costs. On the general side, the town council did spend quite a bit of time on the Junction Village TIF agreement. And they also have spent quite a bit of time advising the planning board this year on a couple of significant subdivision projects, one of which was 1440 Main Street. They spent actually quite a lot of time on that, but because we were proactive in using council in working with town staff and the planning board on that project, the project did receive approval. Now, they have since filed litigation against the town, but the litigation is pretty narrowly tailored as opposed to the entire thing. So that proactive expenditure of legal services for the planning board will likely save us quite a bit of expense on the litigation side. The other thing that's driven costs on the town council side are a really significant number of large, sweeping open records requests that we have received. Some in part due to the Estabrook litigation, and because they are related to Estabrook, they do need council review to reply. And so we've had, and like I said, a number of those that have been looking for thousands of documents that all require some level of review to ensure we're protecting the town's interests in those disclosures. As you may know, the trial for Estabrook was supposed to happen in February. It was delayed till June by mutual agreement of the parties. So there will be some additional expense in the coming weeks to prepare for trial and get ready for that. There was also some motions that were filed as a part of this by the defendants that the town had to respond to that also drove up the costs on the litigation side. And then finally, on the labor side, as you can see, it varies quite a bit over the years. And there are some years that we just have some, unique personnel issues that take time. Some of them are related to COVID, some are not. And this has just been one of those years where personnel issues have come up that have needed legal guidance. So slide 5. So if a transfer is not approved, the only other remedy is a year-end adjustment under MGL 44, section 33B, which can happen until July 15th. As you recall, we did this last year because town meeting was delayed past the end of the fiscal year. And if it's not, we will have an illegal deficit, and that would impact the recap rate on the within the levy for FY22. So the last slide, of course, is just a repeat of the motion.
Thank you, Stephen. Do I have any questions from the FinCom? Phil.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation, Steve. 2 questions. One is the 190,000 to be added to the 421,000 that we already have agreed to? So the budget, the legal services for the town would be 610,000 or so for this year. And the second and the second question is, can you describe what process you go through in terms of getting a budget or estimate from the outside counsel before I guess you or the board of selectmen, the select board approve increases to the legal budget?
Well, I think I wouldn't say it depends on the issue. Back in January, town council did present estimates, and they're not, and we have talked about this, it's not a budget, it's an estimate. And so they present an estimate for what they believe a next phase of services is going to cost. But on many issues, particularly where it's not sure where the interaction is going to take us, it's difficult to estimate how much time it's going to consume with any level of reliability, because, as you know, Phil, like on the planning board issue, much of the time will be generated by actions and decisions by, usually an applicant, or in the case of the open records requests, by the requester. One of the things that town council does do is work really hard. Usually on the large open records requests, they reach out to the requester, whether it's an attorney or an individual, and try and work with them to narrow the scope of the request to make sure that they can reduce the amount of time required. So that, it's a lot. I'm not going to deny that, but we do work to try and reduce costs wherever we can. But our primary obligation is to protect the town's liability interests, to protect the boards and committees like the finance committee, who volunteer and try and make good decisions in the interest of the town. And the 1440 Main Street is a good example, and they got involved fairly early on because we knew it was controversial, and we knew there were some significant legal issues that could be challenged. And so at the beginning of that, did we ask, what do you think this is going to cost to be involved? No, we didn't, because we knew they had to be involved, and we knew that we had to follow where it was going to take us. I mean, at some point we couldn't tell the neighbors out there, we think we spent enough, so we're going to back off of this.
Well, I just want you to suggest that you can ask council to estimate a budget for additional costs, and it happens all the time. It happens to me all the time. And I work at a large law firm in Boston, and all of our lawyers expect to be asked by clients before we undertake the work how much it's going to cost. And usually we wait until they approve that cost before we proceed.
I appreciate that.
Christine, do you have a question?
I do. Stephen, I just wanted to make sure I've got the math right. So the amount that's in actual through March for 2021, the 421,000, that's the amount that you're adding. You're increasing the budget, if you will, to get you to around 550 or 560,000 for 2021. Is that correct? So it's going to be a $500,000 or so in legal expense for 2021. That's what you're predicting now.
Yeah, Carrie, I believe that. I didn't print out the slide, but I believe that's the case. Yes.
Okay.
No, 421 plus 190.
Okay, 421 plus 190. Okay. All right. So those are the two numbers that I'm adding up to see what it is for 2021, or what we expect it is for 2021. Okay, I've got that. Okay. So within the amount that we had appropriated for 2021 for litigation, so we had in the budget, looks like we had 345,000 thereabouts in the budget for 2021. How much of that was for litigation, either Kerry or Stephen?
I don't recall it being split on those grounds. It was just, no, I don't think so. We track it. The litigation litigation in general are billed at different rates. So that's one of the reasons why we track it like that. And certainly our legal bills have categories that both Labor Council and Town Council both have categories that they include on their invoices that track the expenses. The litigation rate is lower for the the partner that we have representing some litigation is lower than the partner we have for general legal in some cases. So, but the line item is a single line item.
Okay. So if I might just add to that, because I think Chris is remembering that we did increase the fiscal 21 budget over the fiscal 20, and we talked about the need to increase. We were attributing that to litigation, and I believe the amount of the increase was $80,000. So we don't have two separate lines, but we did increase the total because of litigation.
Right. Yeah. So, right. So now it ended up costing us 80 plus the 190, or I can't say all of the 190 is related to litigation, but a component of it is related to litigation. I would think a lot of it is. In the accrual for 2022, so if we're over 600,000 for 2021, as we were in 2020. We're proposing 425,000 in the FY22 budget. How comfortable are we that that is enough?
I was asked this question last year, and at the time, the only thing we had that we were looking ahead to that was beyond the norm was the trial. And so we thought at town meeting, I got asked this, I remember on that sunny September afternoon, and I said, as we sit here now, this should cover the additional expense of the trial because that's all we really see ahead of us. Because there are things that are unanticipated that happen. The town gets sued or an issue comes up unexpectedly and we have to respond, with our counsel. So my understanding from talking to counsel, and I believe I've heard this from members in discussions with individual board members, is there's a long history of the legal services line item being underspent year in, year out. And I do think that we'll get to that day again, I hope soon, where we don't spend all of our legal services budget because we're not engaged in significant litigation or open records requests or things like that. So we are increasing it for FY22 based on expenditure trend history, which is what we do with virtually every line item that we have. We look at what are the expenditure trends been and does the appropriation line up? So I'm hoping we don't even come close to the 425 for FY22, but I can't tell you right now what's coming down the pipe.
Thank you.
Dee, do you have a question?
Yes. Could we go to the last slide again, please?
Yeah, Dee, I'll pull it up now.
Thank you.
Which one,
The
Dee?
last slide. No, I'm sorry, the last slide in that series. I think there's one after that. Right, okay. I'd want to go to the last point on that, which is if it does not increase, if the approval for the transfer does not increase the total appropriation. Okay, what if the article is not approved? What
Then
is
we
the,
would-
what are
so
the
that-
ramifications?
Right, so then we would go to Finance Committee and Select Board for an inter-fund transfer. Because if it's not approved, then the 40,000 from the general government line item and the 150 from finance would remain in those accounts. And then we would go back and ask for the transfer from the Finance Committee and Select Board, which is what we did last year at the end of the fiscal year, as you may recall.
Right. So that is still within the time frame after town meeting. So if town meeting does not approve it, then it comes back again to the Select Board and the Finance Committee before the end of June?
Yeah, so as it's kind of written in the small print on the slide, but you have till July 17th to do those transfers under that statutory reference. And last year, as you recall, we did not end up doing there's a budget transfer article on every warrant, as sometimes it's a placeholder, sometimes it's needed for transfers. But because town meeting was in September, we were not, but that a lot of the stuff that the governor and the legislature did in terms of amending standing processes to accommodate for the pandemic, they did not change that one. And so that decision still had to be made by July 15th.
Okay. And if it is not, if it doesn't get approved by town meeting and it comes to the Select Board and the Finance Committee and it's not approved, then what happens?
Then we're in trouble with DOR.
Right. And it has a possible implication associated with our bond rating? Is that
I'll defer to Kerry on that, but it definitely impacts our levy.
So there certainly is not a direct correlation with the bond rating. We will have to raise it, as the town manager said, on fiscal 22 levy or tax rate. I can tell you, because this has come up the last couple of years, so I have had the opportunity to talk to the Department of Revenue, to our auditors. I've talked to town council, our financial advisor. It would not look good for the town of Concord to not take care of its budgetary matters when it had the opportunity to do so. It is not going to change our bond rating, but it's going to look odd that we had an issue with the budget and we had two opportunities to correct it and we chose not to.
Okay.
And we chose instead so we have the money to do it within the budget that we've already taxed people for, that we've already collected. And if it is not addressed in one of these two manners, that money that we've collected is going to close to our fund balance, and then we're going to have to collect it again, put it on the tax levy and collect it again.
Kerry, is it safe to say that it could potentially yield a finding in our audit and our management letter?
I think if it continued to happen, yes. If it happened one time, it likely would not make it into the management letter.
Okay, and is there any kind of subsequent financial penalty if it doesn't get approved? Would the state happen to fine us for something or not?
The state would not fine us, but the state Department of Revenue would not be happy that we closed the year
right
deficit that we did not have the legal authority to have.
Okay.
There are legal deficits like a snow and ice deficit.
Right.
If you had a court settlement, that's a legal deficit. This is not a legal deficit. It's not something that's allowed for under Mass General Law.
Okay, thank you.
Greg, you have a question. Go ahead. You're muted, Greg. No, you're still muted.
Oh, your earphones turned off.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, you have to do the sound, same as thing there.
Greg, you can always try typing in the Q&A.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Chris, do we have any questions from the attendees?
We have a comment. It's not a question.
Go ahead.
You want me to read it's from Terry Rothermel, if I say that correctly. And Terry writes, if doesn't pass, it may affect the outcome of the trial, which right now is leaning our way.
Can I comment on that? And just say that the trial is going to happen no matter what. If this is approved or not approved, the trial will go forward because we are scheduled for early June, and the town is committed to the trial. So I just think I don't know that I would agree with that assessment.
I'm going to ask Mr. Rothermel if he wants to be heard more than just have his question read.
I'll promote him now.
All right. This is Terry Rothermel, 330 Musketaquid Road.
Go ahead.
In Mass. You know that. In the last trial decision last summer, it was clear that the judge was leaning our way in terms of the merits of the case. What we're looking at now is a trial that, as the town manager said, is going to be over in a few months, but there's always appeals. We're not dealing here just with financial questions about our financial rating. We're dealing with the right of access of the public and the citizens of Concord. To in any way weaken that position will be not to the benefit of our citizens' access. Thanks for hearing me out.
Thank you. Stephen, do you want to respond to that or amend your response earlier? Or how?
No, I wasn't going to comment at all on which way the trial is leaning or anything. I mean, that's a subject that we've talked about at the select board, and I'm going to leave it there. Okay. It is, I think I agree. We must proceed with the trial. And that is the cost of that trial, I think, as we sit here now, not knowing what motions may be filed or what things may happen during the trial, we think we should be able to get through it with what we're requesting.
Thank you. Greg, are you?
I am fixed, hopefully.
Great, go ahead.
So this is the same topic that has come up, as Carrie said, 2 times, I think, in the past, or definitely a big conversation we had last year. Is there any way that we can put in the pamphlet on this, that this is not a FinCom, this is not a decision that FinCom is supporting of the trial, but it is supporting, if we decide to, it is moving money around and it has no impact on what we as a committee see about the trial. It's more of a financial budgetary obligation, because people, I keep seeing this come up, as people are tying this moving of finance is around for budgetary concern to the FinCom saying, yes, we support the trial, which is, these two are totally independent. And I think we need to get that message out as from the previous public comment there, right? That this has nothing to do with FinCom support for the trial.
Greg, good point. I think that that's something we will take up after the hearing when the Finance Committee crafts our recommendation one way or the other relative to this article. Okay, so hold that.
And Mary, if I may, I just want to reiterate, going back to we don't need to go back to the slide, but there are 3 distinct categories that are needed, and all of them are in need, not just litigation.
I see a question from Linda Miller. Chris, can you please make Linda a panelist?
She's on mute though.
It's actually Frederick Miller at 300 Main Street in Concord.
Go ahead.
I observed that the reduction or the move of funds from the finance department budget is about 7%. And I'd like to understand how that much fund is available.
I mean, Kerry can speak to the specifics of it, but it's mostly vacancies.
Yeah, that is in fact true. There is one position that has been vacant for the entire year, and we chose not to refill it because of the pandemic. We have another position that will be vacant at the end of the year, probably for about 80% of the year, and again, chose to not refill it because of the pandemic. We are, as you all know, we are in our temporary quarters while the townhouse is being renovated. And the finance department is a customer service center. And as you might imagine, the level of customer service while we are here ready, willing, and able to serve, the number of customers we have to service has really gone down. So we found that we were able to keep those positions vacant, but don't expect to be able to do that going into the next fiscal year.
Thank you.
So Kerry, is it safe to say that these positions are in the FY22 budget that we are going to talk to next?
Yes, they are. One of them has actually been transferred from finance to general government, and we talked about that at a previous hearing. The other position is fully funded within the fiscal 22 budget.
Great. Okay, Chris, do we have any other questions from?
No.
No? Okay, great. Okay, let's move on to the next question, next article, I mean, which is the FY22 town manager's budget.
Okay. Thank you very much. Written there is in the fine print, so to speak, is the motion. Ms. Escobedo moves that the town take affirmative action on Article 10 as printed in the handout pertaining to the article. So one thing we have to look at, excuse me, the handout, we're anticipating the potential for a handout at town meeting for the budget article. We may not, but we're anticipating that it may happen. I think we've talked about this in this space, but certainly at the select board, there's the possibility that the May 10th is when the guidance for the American Recovery Plan Act, ARPA, comes out. And as I've mentioned, there may be some opportunity to restore some lost revenue, especially in the parking, which would have a domino effect on certain aspects to the proposed FY22 budget. So scenario A would be that doesn't happen and it's as presented in the warrant, and it assumes the parking meter expenses will be rolled into general fund budget due to insufficient revenue because the meters, as you know, were off for a good chunk of the year. And that's about $150,000 subsidy. And then it assumes the use of $867,000 of FY21 carry forward, which is unspent appropriation, which we are proposing to use to balance the budget, as opposed to having it go to free cash and then needing a free cash appropriation to balance the budget. And that's something that is allowed under the new laws that have been done for the pandemic by the state. Scenario B, which is we get some of our ARPA money and are able to use it for revenue loss. It assumes that the parking meter program expenses will be funded under Article 16, which would be supplemented by ARPA, and then overall appropriation would then be reduced by $400,000, which would be the parking meter program expenses. They would go back into the special fund, and then it would then reduce the amount of the carry forward to $712,000. So we just want to give everybody a heads up that this is something that we are, based on what we've seen on about ARPA, this seems to be a pretty straightforward way to get some of that money infused into our budget to backfill some. The lost parking revenue was really an economic vitality expense. The meters were kept off to support the local businesses. So hopefully, so basically stay tuned on that, but we just want to give everybody the heads up there may be a handout for the motion.
Great.
So just the manner of appropriation, I'll go through this very, very quickly. Town's budget is appropriated, as I mentioned in the last presentation, 16 line items, 1 through 12 are guidelines, 13 through 16 are fixed, and then the others, and then once those are appropriated, we manage to the bottom line. And as we said, that if adjustments are needed, we go through them in the two ways we just discussed. So I'll go turn it to Carrie now.
Sure. Thank you. This slide shows a summary of the line item appropriations on the left-hand side and a summary of the various funding supporting the appropriations on the right-hand side. Next slide. The town's budget is a very lengthy process, or the process for producing the town budget is very lengthy, typically beginning at the end of the summer and concluding in early February in time for an April town meeting. Due to the pandemic, the budget process has been altered to instead prepare for a June town meeting. The fiscal 22 budget process began in earnest in November, and through a series of internal meetings with department managers and then meetings with both the Finance Committee and the Select Board, that has resulted in the recommended budget that is being presented this evening. I will note that the full budget document is available on the town's website under public information and then further under budgets. Next slide.
So the budget recommendation, as you can see, meets the FY22 Finance Committee guideline, which provides for 3.32% increase over the final FY21 budget, which, as we discussed during guidelines, was reduced from the original proposed FY21 budget. The estimated property tax increase needed to support this budget and all spending proposed at the at the 2021 annual town meeting is 2.5%. As mentioned previously, one of the funding sources to support the budget is carry forward a portion of the unanticipated unspent FY21 appropriation, which is available due to vacancies, prolonged building closures, remote work, and other factors as a result of the pandemic. Use of this carry forward will impact the following year's free cash certification, but it also keeps the property tax increase at a reasonably affordable 2.5% and maintains our services as we look for the rebound of local receipts. And again, the ARPA funds have a chance to help in both of those things. Next slide. Thank you. So looking at the budget drivers, the guideline, the guideline increase, I think you all have seen before. So the total amount there, in between the guideline, a reduction in capital and to transfer some of that to operating, and additional non-property tax revenue to support services. the total amount for the increase is about $1.5 million. We had 5 categories: COVID response, generally, cybersecurity, again, generally, planned service level increases, things that we have been planning for and are continuing to execute as we move forward. Some new requests, and then contractual, fixed, or other personnel. We did receive about 1.9 million in requests, and we pared that down to $1.5 million recommended increase. So we'll go through some of the categories very briefly. Next slide. So the FY22 budget recommendation includes $191,000 in additional spending to address continued impacts of the pandemic, which will change our operations really it is a lasting impact for the foreseeable future, requiring supplemental air filtration, additional cleaning. And I know that there's new guidance out there on cleaning and filtration, but we are still cleaning our buildings every day, and we are going to err on the side of caution for both air quality and the quality of our cleaning. And then parking meter revenue, as you can see, has taken a big hit and have just recently come back online. But the meter maintenance and other fixed costs have continued to accrue. So again, we will be looking to use potentially some ARPA money to offset that and restore some of that revenue. Next slide. So we've been calling this throughout the budget process, as the Finance Committee knows, cybersecurity. There's a lot we're doing with our technology and our IT systems. So we have undertaken a cybersecurity audit, and we're in the process of deploying those recommendations, which include additional hardware to improve network security. We are transitioning to Office 365, which is a cloud-based platform. And we are purchasing additional parts and equipment to have on hand to quickly address and fix failures. A lot of times with network switches, or we are moving some things to the cloud. Some things we will continue to retain in-house, and so it's good to have hardware when things go down. CARES Act has covered a lot of this, but not all of it, and so we have been able to, like I said, offset most of it, but that 77,000 is still an increase related to cybersecurity. Next slide. So planned service level increases, that's about 230,000. The big one, even though we have been in a pandemic, and I think at the outset of at the guidelines process, I talked about the challenge of budgeting for a year that is both half pandemic and a return probably likely to full service. I think we said that long before the governor made his announcement last week, and we're certainly headed in that kind of full service, fully back open direction. But our budget is still very conservative because we weren't sure what the lasting impacts of the pandemic were going to be. So we needed to keep moving forward, though, with some of the things that have been planned. Obviously, one of the significant ones is the increase in the library expansion, which requires a couple of additional FTEs to help manage that additional square footage and those additional programming spaces. And then they are prorated, though, because the library is going to come, part of it's going to come online, I believe, in September, but I think most of it's going to come all along about halfway through the fiscal year. So at the end of calendar 2021. And then we have proposed some increases for conservation crew and rangers to make sure we do a more diligent job in overseeing town-owned lands. I think that that's a trend that we will continue to see, meaning high utilization of town lands that we saw really mushroom in the pandemic, and I do expect to see that trend continue. Next slide. And then each year we are presented new requests to address varied and increasing demands for service. And we do have about a net of $168,000 of new requests. That is obviously far less than the new requests that were made because we just can't fulfill all the needs within the budget we have. And the New requests include, as we talked about just a few moments ago, legal services, additional funding for CPW for both PFAS, which is sometimes they're called forever chemicals. There are things in water. There was an article in the Journal last week about it. We talked about the select board. So that's a requirement from SDEP to do that testing. And then some restructuring to make us more effective in our operations and more nimble in the park and tree division. And then dedicated efforts for economic vitality. And also, as you can see here as well, we're doing some increased hours for social workers. That need, we do anticipate continuing. That need spiked that need's always high, but it spiked during the pandemic. We see that continuing forward. And then archives and committee management is something that that's a path we've been on, but we see additional needs that need to be met. So next slide. And as you can see, we are just calling out here economic vitality. We're creating a separate distinct division within general government. Actually, the economic vitality division will be a part of the division of the Department of Planning and Land Management. The economic vitality director is a full-time position, and there'll be additional limited status hours for part-time staff dedicated to seasonal tourism, particularly manning the visitor center. And we also budgeted some matching funds for a grant that we are working on, and that we may have already received as well. I have to double check that. And then I'll ask Carrie to jump in here.
So this final category of budget drivers provides funding for both contractually obligated salary adjustments in accordance with existing collective bargaining agreements and COLA adjustments for non-union personnel. While non-union increases have yet to be determined, they are anticipated to be similar to the amounts granted in fiscal 21 and in line with comparable communities, but in all likelihood lower than pre-pandemic adjustments. So Wade, I don't think we ever answered the question you asked back in Article 5, but the wage adjustments that are proposed in that scale are included in the guidelines budget. Next slide. So next, fixed costs. The balance of the proposed increase is in the joint accounts, which are those accounts shared between the town and school department, such as insurance, debt service, and retirement expenditures. These items total about $20.2 million, or approximately 41.6% of the town's budget. They're summarized here, and I will review them in a bit more detail in the remaining portion of this presentation. Next slide, please. The second largest expense in this category is group insurance, consisting of the employer's share of health, dental, and life insurance benefits provided to both town and Concord Public Schools employees. The town offers 4 health insurance plans through a group insurance cooperative of approximately 15 other municipalities. The fiscal year renewals on these plans range between 1% and 8%. Approximately 2/3 of eligible town and about 60% of eligible CPS employees are enrolled in town-provided health insurance plans. Of those enrolled, approximately 36% are enrolled in high-deductible plans, which carry an approximate 20% decrement in premium costs. And we're very proud that we are the one member of our health insurance cooperative that actually has substantial enrollment in the high deductible plans. Since first offering the high deductible plans in fiscal 20, the town has made great efforts to educate employees of the benefit these types of plans provide to most, but obviously not all employees. Next slide. The town of Concord is the single largest member of the Concord Retirement System, which is an independent entity administering retirement benefits to town, school, and housing authority employees. Each year, the town pays an annual assessment to the retirement system based upon an actuarial valuation of system assets and benefits owed. The town funds its annual assessment from 2 sources. First, budget appropriations, And then second, a transfer from the pension reserve account. This is an account that was established many years ago for the purpose of smoothing the annual budget increases. So you may read about increases in retirement assessments in other communities and see that they're 8, 9, 10+%. The establishment of this pension reserve allows us, or has allowed us since it was established, to keep our annual assessments between 3 to 5% each year, regardless of how the assets are doing and the benefits that are owed in almost all cases. So this was an excellent tool to put in place many, many years ago. The town is nearing the end of its funding schedule, and as a result has been able to increase the amount being transferred from the pension reserve account, resulting in a reduction in the amount of new money that is needed for the assessment in fiscal 22. The town's funding plan fully amortizes the pension's unfunded liability as of fiscal 29. Slide 17, I think right here, this slide shows the annual payments which will be required of each fund through the end of the funding schedule based upon the 1/1/2020 system valuation. So each of the funds that pay for, that have employees contribute their actuarially determined share of the liability. And this shows what they will be contributing. Again, we have our system valued each year. So these numbers will change somewhat, but we do have a long-term forecast for pension assessment through full amortization of the unfunded liability. Next slide. Debt service is the single largest expense in the fixed cost category. This category includes the annual debt service payments associated both within levy or non-excluded debt and excluded debt. In total, in fiscal 22, debt service expense is projected to be $11,036,714, which is about the same as it was or is in the current fiscal year, though there is a slight decrease in excluded debt and a slight increase in within levy debt. Next slide. This slide shows all existing general fund debt through full repayment. Note that this slide does not include any of the following. It does not include debt service associated with CCRSD or Minuteman Regional. Those are part of assessments and we're just not showing them here. It does not include debt service associated with any already approved but not yet financed projects. These are the items that are appearing on our authorized but unissued schedule, which at this point, there's only about $1.8 million worth of general fund projects on that schedule. So that's pretty low, but there is $24.5 million in enterprise fund projects, but again, not included here because that debt is funded through user fees. It also does not include any debt service associated with any future capital projects, including the Concord Middle School. Last slide. Again, to recap the proposed budget. Oh, I'm sorry, Stephen. I'm just.
No, you're on a roll. Take it home.
Okay. The proposed budget is in conformance with the guidelines set by the Finance Committee in February. The budget request includes the level of funding needed to support existing services and to provide increased service levels at the library and in natural resources, as well as to provide funding to respond to emerging needs to address the residual effects of the pandemic and the need for additional cybersecurity measures. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'd open that up to any questions from the Finance Committee. Christine, I see your hand up. You're on mute, Chris.
Yep. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Carrie and Stephen, for the presentation. I just have maybe 2 or 3 questions. I'll try and hit them quickly. On page 13 of the warrant, there's a discussion about a salary reserve account. I think it's line item 10 under the total government accounts 1 through 10. And there's some footnotes associated with that, Carrie. And I was just trying to understand how to read the changes from fiscal 20, fiscal 21, and fiscal 22. The number seems to bounce around, so I wanted some help understanding that.
Sure. And this is something that I know is very confusing. We've talked about this before. So under Mass General Law, we are allowed to create a salary reserve account for the purpose of setting aside funding to settle collective bargaining agreements or to provide salary increases for non-union employees. We are not allowed to directly charge to that account. So once a contract is settled, if the cost of that, say it's the police contract and it costs $100,000, we have to transfer that money from the reserve to the police department budget. So when you see in fiscal 21 that number is negative, we had talked when we went through the budget approval for fiscal 21, that we had an encumbrance from prior years that was used. So this is showing as negative because we used $374,236 in an encumbrance to pay for those salary adjustments. So I apologize. I know it's very confusing, and I can tell you internally we argue about it a little bit too, because it's hard to wrap your hands around.
Okay. So, but the amount that each year you set up some amount, and that amount is the 225?
Yes. And then as the year goes on, monies will be transferred out of there. And likely when you look a year from now, that number in fiscal 22 should be 0.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. My second question is on that same page in the joint section, the very last line. This is page 13 of the warrant article, 14A and 14B, which you reference the retirement and the retirement pension reserve. So the pension reserve was or is going to be 1.4 million. So instead of taking it through line 14A, is it in 14B? I'm just trying, is that like a reclass? Yeah. Okay.
So no. I was saying yep, because I was following your question. So as I mentioned, the town has been transferring money from the pension reserve for many years, but we have been transferring it directly. We have not been appropriating it. We have been advised by our auditors and the Department of Revenue that we should, in fact, be appropriating it. So that's what we're doing beginning in fiscal 22. It would be nice if we probably should have somehow footnoted it, but we went back and forth about whether we should include it for the purposes of comparing apples to apples. But because it wasn't appropriated in prior years, it's not showing there.
Okay, thank you. My last question is going back to, I think, Stephen's first slide on the parking. I just want to make sure I have my logic correct. So there's a parking deficit that's included in the general budget. The deficit is being funded in the general fund right now. If you get did you call it ARPA? Some ARPA funds you may get between now and the end of the year. You would be able to remove that deficit from the general fund and fund it essentially with other government funds. That's what it sounds like to me might happen. Is that correct?
That's correct. That might happen. I think one of the things is, the guidance hasn't, like I said, they've given broad categories. And the funds, I think, continue into the end of 2024. So we are going to take a pretty methodical approach at how we deploy those. But this was kind of a very low hanging piece of fruit that we identified that could help FY22 kind of in real time if the funds became available. So that's why we said this is an easy, straightforward thing. The domino effects on the general fund subsidy of the parking meter funds and that impact on the carry forward they're not too tough to track, but for you guys, but I think someone who's just getting the booklet and looking at it may be a little bit hard to track that. So we want to make sure we at least start to talk about this might happen and here's what it means.
Okay. So if you are able to take the deficit from 2021 into another fund, essentially for funding from ARPA in 2022, wouldn't that increase the general fund surplus for 2021? No? If you're funding a deficit now and you don't have to, you won't be funding it. No, that's where I got confused. Because I saw the free cash number went down and that's where I got lost.
No, the carry forward would go down, which would push the free cash number up.
Okay.
Because then what we don't carry forward would be returned to free cash.
Okay, so free cash would go up by the 150? Yeah, okay,
Yes.
That makes sense to me. That's what I was trying to follow. Okay.
Yeah, the carry forward going down is good.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. That's where I was getting confused. Okay, and now my add-on question, and I promise I'll be done, is to the extent that, and this relates to, I think, a later warrant article, so to the extent that we create a separate fund for parking meter receipts, so now they're all stuck in the general fund, and if we put it off to the side, do we generally run, in a normal year, do we generally run, not the right term, but I'll have to use, profit? If you look at parking costs versus parking revenue, is it a surplus? And so are we moving surplus out of the general fund over to a separate fund? That's all. That's what I'm trying to find out. Am I losing a revenue source in the general fund?
So I'm happy to take that one. We already have a parking meter revolving fund.
Okay.
And we run this program through that revolving fund. Okay. Because we are projecting a deficit, I can't run a deficit through a revolving fund. So as a temporary stopgap measure, we're just moving all of that program over to the general fund.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I am done. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the Finance Committee? Okay, I see some questions from the public.
Yes. So we have one from Pamela Dritt, and that's also regarding parking meters. Can we promote Pamela?
And Diane.
And Diane.
They are on their way.
Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green, Unit 4.
Go ahead, Pamela.
For your hard work. I appreciate it. I know that the parking meters, Mr. Town Manager told us, are not aimed at producing revenue, excess revenue for the town itself, but are aimed at covering the costs of the meter system. And I know also that businesses have been urging the meters to be put in for fear that they will lose parking for their customers. And I guess thinking other businesses will, customers and employees will take up all the parking all the time. But it seems to me that if we're requiring a large investment in town resources for this whole system, and it is not empirically suggested that we really do need it in order to manage parking. And it seems to me that on Sundays, when the meters are not being used, businesses do not have difficulty. In fact, more ease. There's more of an encouragement of casual shopping and browsing along, not to have the meters going. So can we please have some empirical justification for why we really need them?
So I don't know if this is a question for here regarding the annual budget. And as you know, Pamela, we did do a discussion about this a couple of weeks ago at the select board. And so I guess at this point, since I think you remain unconvinced, I would invite you to contact me and we can talk offline about parking systems, and I can try and give you as much information as I have, and we can go from there. But I don't know if it's a budget question necessarily.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you, Pamela. Diane.
Hi, Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road. Thank you for the very good work that you're doing. I wonder if there's a place that citizens can find out where the $5.5 million that we received in the CARES Act, where that money was spent, and how in anticipation, and Christine, this is very much what you were asking, but in anticipation perhaps of new revenue, where we anticipate using that and whether it can reduce both the budget and at the same time the tax burden in the town. Thank you very much.
So I guess if any other person was asking that, I would direct them to the website. But Diane, because it's you, I don't think I can do that. So the select board we did a presentation to the select board. Diane and I have a running thing about the town's website. That's why I said that. Sorry. We did a presentation to the select board. It may have been a month ago now. I don't care if you remember the exact date, where we did go through in some level of detail where the CARES Act money went. I don't remember the exact date, but Chris and Jeremy and I, between the three of us, can try and track that down and send you a link to that meeting. And I think we can probably put, it's in the packet. We had a report that was in that packet, and I can try and call that information and get it over to you. And then in terms of the ARPA money, we have been told the number's 5.5, and we have been told the broad categories, but we have not been given the guidance. That's May 10th. This is what they're saying. Treasury is going to release the guidance May 10th. I think the guidance is going to be heavily focused on more urban recipients because there's a couple of thresholds that they're going through. So we're all kind of holding our breath on what that guidance on the 10th says. But as soon as we have that, we will certainly report on where we think we can use that. But it's going to, I do very much foresee that unlike the CARES Act, where we were on we thought we were on kind of a tight deadline to spend it. So we really did a lot of research and made a lot of condensed expenditures to help manage our pandemic response in a very short amount of time. These funds, the ARPA funds, I can see us really much more doing. I don't want to use the word piecemeal, but more sequential. Instead of kind of all at once like CARES, we will kind of, where are broadband investments needed? What type of economic vitality programs are needed to support businesses? What are the other eligible uses, things like that.
I thank you very much, Stephen. And I did hear that presentation. I was asking really where citizens can find it, so that as they look at the budget and see what the past costs are and how they maybe perhaps offset future costs. I think that anything we can do to make that clear, I think will help in the whole discussion of the budget. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I just would just say for Diane and the committee's benefit, there's not really a way to do that in the budget document. It's, as you know, until we have the sources, we can't really report those under the sources and uses headings. The one that we think we may be able to do, we've already just reported to you. In terms of CARES, those were really kind of out, they were specifically unbudgeted expenses. So it's hard to make a link between a budget document and those sources of funds, but we will endeavor to be as transparent as we can in terms of what we get in and where we spend it.
That's terrific. I think perhaps if there were a way to have an addendum to the budget that would just let people know what kind of support we got from the federal government, I think it would be helpful. That's all. Thank you.
So can I make a suggestion? Stephen, wouldn't this be on the website under the select board supporting materials?
I'm sorry, Mary, it's the January 4th, 2021 select board meeting materials.
Thank you. So it is on the website, right under the select board supporting materials. So that's the place where citizens can easily see the supporting doc as far as how the CARES Act money was spent. And that wasn't actually 5.5 million. I think it was closer to
1.6.
2.6, yeah.
No, 1 point, CARES Act was 1.6. I think we ended up only spending about 1.1, 1.2, or that was eligible. The ARPA money is 5.5, and we just haven't gotten it yet. We have not received that yet.
But it's safe to say that is not part of the budget.
I understand. I'm just trying to, I've received a lot of questions about where is that money and how was it spent? And I just think anything the FinCom can do to help make that transparent to citizens is fantastic. So I'll find a way of getting the January 1st document and getting it out to people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Christine, do we have any other questions?
Not that I can see, Mary.
Great. Okay, let's move to the OPEB trust fund appropriation. Carrie, are you going to sponsor this article?
Yes.
Okay.
So these next two articles are new articles on the town meeting warrant. The first one, Article 11. Chris, are you bringing up that presentation?
Sorry, yep, let me grab it.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the first slide, which is the motion. This article seeks town meeting appropriation of the annual contribution to the town's other post-employment benefits trust fund for fiscal 22. Next slide. The town of Concord was one of the first communities in the Commonwealth to establish an OPEB trust fund. In 2008, the state legislature adopted a special act granting the town special permission to establish this fund prior to there being specific authorization to do so. Later, the legislature enacted a new law allowing all communities to establish OPEB funds. And at the 2019 annual town meeting, upon the recommendation of the town's auditor and town council, the town of Concord reauthorized its trust fund under the new state legislation. Next slide. In each year since 2009, the town has made a contribution to the trust fund in accordance with the OPEB funding plan. Now, I say this is new because in prior years, we appropriated the annual contribution to the OPEB trust fund under the budget article. And we've been advised that we should now do this in a standalone article. The town's OPEB liability is valued each year as of June 30. As of the most recent valuation, the total liability was $59.9 million, of which approximately 35.5% was funded. The funding plan assumes a 6.75% discount rate and fully funds the liability as of fiscal 39. As a result of the town's strong funding position, beginning in fiscal 22, the remaining unfunded liability will be amortized in level payments. Next slide. While each of the town's major funds share a portion of the unfunded liability, since inception, only the general fund's share of the annual OPEB contribution has been appropriated by town meeting, and again has been done so within the budget article rather than a standalone warrant article. Next slide. In fiscal 22, a total of $1,467,851 is requested to be appropriated across all major funds, as shown in the chart on this slide. Once again, the amounts shown are based upon the newly determined level payment plan prepared using the results of the most recent valuation. For the general fund, the fiscal 22 contribution is approximately $300,000 lower than fiscal 21, which provides much welcome relief as our local receipts are slowly recovering from the pandemic. So as the finance committee knows, this was an item that we had talked about, and it really helped to keep that property tax increase at 2.5%. So this was a great time to be able to make this change. The last slide. Again, this article seeks town meeting appropriation of the town's fiscal 22 annual contribution to the OPEB trust fund in a standalone warrant article as recommended by the Massachusetts Department of Revenue and the town's external auditor.
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions from the Finance Committee? Seeing none, I'll open it up to the audience. Christine, do we have any questions?
We do not, Mary, not that I can see.
Seeing none, we can move along to Article 12.
Okay, Article 12 seeks town meeting appropriation, the annual expense, the town's other post-employment benefit trust. Similarly, the Department of Revenue and the town's auditor have recommended that the OPEB trust fund expenses be both appropriated and appropriated in a standalone warrant article. Eligible expenses, I'm sorry, Chris, I'm on slide 2. Eligible expenses include the cost of the actuarial valuation, which we do annually, investment manager fees, and trustee compensation. These are eligible expenses. In past years, some but not all OPEB expenses have been appropriated. And specifically, the investment management fees have not been appropriated, but have instead been netted from earnings. Slide 3. For fiscal 22, we expect to seek appropriation of an amount, and I don't have the amount specified yet, to cover actuarial services and investment advisory services. The amount is not yet known as we are still in the process of procuring these services. Contracts for both services are expected to be negotiated in May, with the final expense known prior to annual town meeting. So just so everybody is clear, the last article is appropriating the annual assessment into the trust fund. And this article is appropriating the expenses of the trust fund to be expended. Hopefully that is clear, but I would be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I'll open it up. Any questions from the Finance Committee?
Just one question for you, Carrie, around the management expenses for the fund itself. Usually to your point, they net the fees out from usually they just net the fees out from what the earnings are. So can you just help me understand what the mechanics are for this now? So you're explicitly just telling them not to do that, and then you pay this out, or?
Yes, that is correct. That is the way that the state wants municipalities to handle those fees, so that there is transparency and everybody knows what fees are being paid to whom, what amount.
Okay.
Is that okay, Brian? You're okay? Good. Any other questions from the Finance Committee? Seeing none. Chris, do we have any questions from the audience?
No, we do not.
Okay, good. Okay, let's move on to the Capital Improvement and Debt Plan, and I believe Kate Hodges is going to present that as the sponsor of this article.
Yes, thank you. Chris, is this the one that I literally just sent?
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Kate Hodges. I'm the Deputy Town Manager, and tonight I'll be reviewing Article 13, which is the town's capital and debt plan, with particular focus on FY22's outlay amounts and the proposed new debt authorization. Next slide, please. The FY22 capital resources come from two sources: outlay, or what is called cash capital, and debt or borrowing authorizations. We are recommending an appropriation of $800,000 in outlay and $6 million in new debt. The total amount in dollars for projects intended for fiscal year 22 is $9,615,000. That said, many projects are intended to be funded through other means, including prior year's authorizations, CPC allocations, and grant funds. Of the $6 million in new debt, $5.1 million will be used for municipal projects, and $900,000 will be allocated for school-related capital needs. Next slide. In terms of capital outlay, the $800,000 request is split between the line items seen here. The far right column represents the fiscal year 22 funding requests. $450,000 is to be allocated under general government for townwide IT improvements, such as the systematic replacement of computers, printers, phones for our nearly 400-person workforce. $50,000 is proposed under ADA compliance to specifically address hearing accessibility issues throughout the town's various municipal meeting sites, including but not limited to, at this point, Harvey Wheeler, the townhouse, both in the select board room and the hearing room, and the Keyes Road first floor conference room. $100,000 will be used towards the town's plans relative to our fleet electrification, and $25,000 is allocated for one vehicle replacement for the Department of Planning and Land Management. Next. Oh, I'm sorry, not next. 220, but that's okay. Go back, Chris. $220,000 has been allocated to public safety. It includes approximately $140,000 for the systematic and scheduled replacement of vehicles and equipment, including the introduction and integration of additional hybrid and electrical vehicles to their fleet. To date, the police department has 7 electric vehicles and 2 plug-in hybrids. The fire department plans to use $80,000 for their vehicle maintenance, for turnout gear replacement, and upgrades to their medical equipment, such as the batteries for AEDs. And finally, $105,000 will be appropriated to Public Works for a variety of annual programs and initiatives, which are reoccurring on a yearly basis. $25,000 will go to sustainable infrastructure in order to fund the continued implementation of sustainable drainage and stormwater management integration. When roadways, sidewalks, and parks or common areas undergo construction improvements, CPW identifies and tries to implement sustainable drainage and other green types of infrastructure or retrofits, including infiltration basins, bioretention areas, bioswales, pervious pavement where applicable, dry wells, tree plantings, etc. So this approach is intended to stimulate the natural hydrology of the site and reduce and treat pollutants while collecting stormwater. CPW is also going to propose an annual cost of $10,000 to assist them in meeting the new minimum stormwater control measures that are required by our National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. And to meet the mandated manual and uniform traffic control devices for street and regulatory sign design, CPW plans to continue its systematic replacement program for the year of signs. $20,000 has been allocated to that effort. $15,000 will be used for the acquisition of small equipment, specifically by the Park and Tree Division for things like leaf blowers, chainsaws, weed trimmers. CPW is committed to our greenhouse gas emission goals and is looking to include mostly electrical to their work. And public shade trees will receive $35,000 that will be used to enhance the town's urban forests and allow the department to continue the seasonal public shade tree planting program that's been going on for many years now. Next slide, please. New debt, as previously reported, is equal to $6 million. Projects for FY22 will total about 9.6. They're funded as seen in this slide. Next slide, please. Of the $6 million in new debt, 10 municipal projects, initiatives, and purchases constitute the $1.5 million, which will be utilized by the town. Again, $900 is earmarked for the school. Next slide, please. $195,000 will be used by the town's facilities department for the upkeep and maintenance or some minor renovations of the many town-owned and occupied spaces. The list of facilities that are depicted on this slide at the right, although not exhaustive, represents the areas of responsibility for that particular team, which includes a facilities director, an operations coordinator, our town electrician, our HVAC and plumbing tech, and 3 laborers. Next slide, please. $500,000 in new debt and $300,000 in CPC monies make up the amount requested in fiscal year 22 for improvements to the White Pond Beach area. These improvements surround ADA and Architectural Access Board code requirements and best practices, and also provide for the expansion of a more robust stormwater management system to increase pond health. The total cost for this project in its entirety is estimated at about 1.8 to 1.9 million. This will clearly need to be spread out or phased over many years, depending on what, if anything, the community may wish to see at the site once compliance with both code and ADA, as well as the stormwater capture efforts, have been achieved. What you see here is a simple depiction of what could be that would constitute the entire 1.8 or 1.9 million. We're focusing on accessibility and stormwater. Next slide, please. 325,000 is going to be used by the Department of Planning and Land Management to purchase a conservation or preservation restriction on a piece of land which the Ralph Waldo Emerson House sits upon. This parcel has frontage along Lexington Road and abuts the property which the gun house sits on. The area also serves as one of the primary entrances to the Emerson Thoreau Amble, ultimately leading to Fairyland, Walden, or the National Park, depending on which direction you travel. This particular purchase will ensure Concord's ability to maintain the important connection to that in perpetuity. Next, please. The next ask is for the Warner's Pond dredging project. This is a 10-year plus long initiative from the Natural Resources Division for the dredging of certain areas depicted here within the red circles of Warner's Pond, which is located off Commonwealth Ave and immediately adjacent to what will be Concord's newest park, Durrell Park, and the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. Funding for this project is comprised of $1.25 million in new debt, $250,000 from CPC, and $1 million from previous year's authorizations and grants and other sources. The new monies in fiscal year 22 represent the balance necessary to begin this project mobilization, which is slated to begin this fall. Next, please. The original request for this fiscal year capital appropriation, including, amongst other things, $250,000 for the refurbishment of Ladder 1 seen here. When the budget was adjusted in response to the pandemic, this particular line was deferred to this year. So you're seeing this 2 years in a row, but we haven't actually done the work yet. So the ladder's expected lifespan is 20 years. This is the midlife refurbishment, which is part of the town's capital asset management plan. In addition to that, $350,000 will be used to replace 38 of the department's 40 self-contained breathing apparatus units. These units are a basic requirement for all firefighters, and replacement of these units will ensure the fire department's inventory of life-saving equipment is in good working order and also meets the current standards as outlined by the National Fire Prevention Association. Next slide, please. The fiscal year 22 roadway reconstruction program will target the streets or segments of streets listed in the list on the right-hand side. This includes an allowance for mill and fill through targeted pavement patching to address deterioration, which is typically exacerbated by winter. Culverts on Spencer Brook Road, Lowell Road near Keyes, Hawthorne Road, Nursenack Hill, and Minot Road have also been identified as potential replacement priorities due to their deterioration. Drainage collective system upgrades on Hubbard Street, Peter Spring Road, Arrowhead Road, and the Minuteman Road neighborhood are also likely, but are currently being evaluated by CPW's engineering staff for priority listing. Next, please. The two vehicles seen on this slide, similar to in past years' capital plans, represent particularly large equipment purchases which are historically purchased through debt authorizations such as this. In this case, $245,000 will be spent to purchase a 2021 forestry bucket truck required for tree maintenance services as depicted on the left. This will replace CPW's 2002 version of the same truck. $235,000 will be used to purchase a 2021 Ilgreen Pelican 3-wheel street sweeper, which will replace the town's 2006 version, which is currently out of service and has been for some time due to mechanical issues. CPW went through the effort to get a cost to repair the 06 model, but the cost to repair exceeds the value of the equipment and didn't seem financially feasible. Next. This is just a reiteration of the motion, and the town departments and the town manager's office would request favorable action.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions from the Finance Committee? Christine.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Kate, this is kind of a maybe a little different question, but when you're getting input, or maybe I should ask the question differently, how do you get input or how do you plan for recreational needs in the town? So, if someone's interested in we need more places for people to play basketball, or we need more places for people to run track. Is there a process for that? How would that happen?
Yeah, it's actually, it's a very timely question because I attended the Recreation Commission's meeting on Tuesday, and it was specifically to discuss an update to their park and playground facilities master plan. And so the last time that was conducted was in 2014, and it was really a very truncated version. They were mainly only dealing with ball fields and not passive recreation areas, and they definitely were not dealing with conservation areas or hiking. And so it didn't really, the study was good and it was helpful as far as sports are related, but it didn't deal too much with sort of other types of recreational opportunities. And so the plan is to work with the commission to develop a scope of services and to hopefully commission a study like that to try to understand what the community needs in a more technical way. So between the time that was done and now, what has generally happened is either opportunities such as the Giroux property have come to our attention. And so that was discussed in small, groups, as you know, and then throughout town meeting. And then opportunities such as the generous donation of White Pond, that happened, and other more grassroots efforts. And I relate that directly to pickleball, which seems to have taken off and become quite popular in many communities, but particularly in Concord. A group of people who enjoy playing pickleball came forward to the former recreation director and asked if they could help to raise funding, matching funding for the rec department to be able to line the tennis courts for pickleball courts. And so that's sort of how we find out, and it's much less formal than it should be.
Okay, and do those communications or inquiries or lines of communication include the schools and what they're looking for recreation space?
They include the youth sports groups who go all the way up through middle school. They have not historically, at least since I've been here, included the high school because the high school has their own set of needs, and frankly, they have those needs met on their campus. So with the exception of the track, that's the only one that really is something that we work together to outline sort of what we need to do for the track, the useful life of that, and that kind of stuff. We haven't talked too much about anything else, and the turf fields, obviously, the Doug White turf fields that are at the top.
When you say passive sports, or passive activities, what do you mean?
So those are ones that are generally done in areas that are not your typical sports court. So Giroux Recreation Area, when it's complete, is a perfect example. That is a passive recreational park. So there's benches for sitting, there'll be rain gardens, there'll be an ability to bring your canoe, your own personal canoe or kayak, and launch that yourself. There's a small bathroom facility. It connects to biking, and there's some hiking trails. There's no basketball, there's no dance floor, there's no band shell. Doesn't mean that there can't be, but there isn't one planned for now.
Okay, so it sounds like the Rec Commission is thinking about or is considering performing a more formalized review of, gee, do we have enough recreation facilities in the town? Is that fair to say? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, it's very fair to say, and I think they're not just considering it, they'd really like to pursue it. And so that was sort of the catalyst to have, and unfortunately, that meeting was one of the victims of a Zoom bomb. And so we had to delay that till later in the month. But we began to sort of outline the process of, how much data do they want to collect? What are the groups that they want involved in this? How far do they want to go? What are they looking at? And so I think that you'll probably see that, me and a member of the commission will likely come back to Finance Committee in an upcoming year and be talking about, getting some capital funding to be able to go forward and have that process.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the Finance Committee? I have a question for you, Kate. How do you clearly delineate the responsibilities of the NRC when it comes to open space and the rec department when it comes to recreation activities in open spaces? Is that, I always get confused about who.
Sure. Effectively, the parks that are considered and called parks and park areas that are under the auspices of the town of Concord. So I think technically, if you were to go onto the GIS and you were to click on a parcel, it would say who it falls under. And for the most part, it's either the just general town of Concord or the town of Concord Select Board. A couple like Emerson are under the Recreation Department. The others are under NRC. What I can say about how it works in practice is that we have a very close, really good working relationship with NRC. Delia and Ryan Orr, so Delia, our Natural Resources Director, Ryan Orr, our Facilities Director, who also runs the Park and Playground crew, are talking constantly. We share equipment, we share personnel, where, really, it's truly a partnership, and that's, I think, unique to Concord, and so it works very well. And so we haven't needed to necessarily draw a line in the sand, because the idea is if we need help, we're just going to call one another. But the technical answer to that is what's on the deed.
Thank you. And I have a question for Carrie. Carrie, if the town approves this $6 million of debt appropriation, the debt service of that will be timed in a way that it stays within our policy of 5 to 6% of the operating budget less excluded debt. Is that?
That is correct.
That's a fair statement. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions from the Finance Committee? Okay, I'll open it up for the general public. Do you have any questions, Chris, that you see?
There was a question, and for some reason I don't see it anymore.
Chris, I typed the answer.
Okay.
To that. So if you go in the answered, you'll see.
Okay. So it was, I'll just,
great.
Mary, it was another question from Terry Rothermel.
Okay.
And I think it's been answered, but hoping.
This was a pretty straightforward question, and I think Carrie has answered it.
All right. Then we are all set.
Okay, let's move on to the next article, which is Article 14. Sorry, did somebody just say something? Oh, no. Carrie, are you the sponsor of this one?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So this article seeks to establish annual spending limits for certain revolving funds. Next slide. Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E.5 requires that annual spending limits be set by town meeting for certain revolving funds. Revolving funds authorized under other sections of Mass General Law, such as the Recreation Revolving Fund, do not require annual appropriation. Next slide. This article seeks to establish annual spending limits for the following 4 funds: Regional Housing Services at $325,000, road repair at $120,000, senior services at $45,000, and tree preservation at $100,000. Next slide. Revolving fund receipts come in the form of fees, fines, and donations. The spending goes to supplement existing departmental programs and services. Next slide. including pavement preservation activities, day trips, and other recreational activities for seniors, and services performed through our Regional Housing Services Office, such as consulting on proposed housing projects, reconciliation of the subsidized housing inventory, and other monitoring of existing affordable housing units. Final slide. Again, this article seeks to establish the annual spending limits for these 4 revolving funds as required under Mass General Law.
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions from the Finance Committee? Seeing none, any questions from the public?
Mary, I think Terry didn't see the answer from Carrie, so.
I'm happy to just report on the answer if that works.
I just wrote them back.
So we're going back to the prior, we're going back to a question that was raised at the, when we were talking about the capital improvement plan.
Right.
And
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's a little confusing because when it gets answered, it moves into a different bucket. So Mr. Rothermel's question is, how much have we already put aside for the dredging project, referring to Warner's Pond? In other years, he believes that the appropriation has been much less. So in fiscal 20, the town appropriated $75,000. And in fiscal 21, a total of $1 million, $500,000 coming from CPC funds and $500,000 through debt in the town's capital plan.
Mr. Rothermel, has that answered your question?
We promote him?
Sure.
Ellen. Mr. Rothermel, you're on the panel.
Here, unmuted. Terry Rothermel, 330 Muscataqua Road. Yes, that does answer my question. And is this scheduled to be done this year?
Kate, you want to take that?
Sure. Are you asking about the dredging? The dredging, Mr. Rothermel? Yep. So pending the outcome of town meeting, I think we're hopeful that at the end of summer, we'll be able to put out an RFP and probably do some initial mobilizing and prep work. And then probably have to go early in the spring the following year before too much of the blooms take up, and then it becomes very difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, that closes out Article 13 and then Article 14. We don't have any questions on that, I see. So I'm moving to Article 15, which is the establishment of a parking meter fund and repeal of the parking meter revolving fund. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but Carrie, if you want to give us some more details, go ahead.
Sure. So this article seeks town meeting acceptance of certain sections of Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 22C, establishing a special revenue parking meter fund, which allows for the segregation of parking meter receipts and repeals the existing parking meter revolving fund bylaw. Next slide. Action taken under Article 65 of the 1975 annual town meeting first established the town's parking meter revolving fund bylaw, allowing for the segregation of parking meter receipts, which would have otherwise been considered general fund receipts. And these receipts were set aside for the purpose of funding the operations of the town's parking management plan. Slide 3. One more. Oh, I guess not. One back. Due to recent changes in Mass General Law, the town has been advised that it must reauthorize the parking meter fund under Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 22C, in order to continue to segregate these receipts. If this article is approved, these receipts will be classified as receipts restricted for appropriation, and they will then require annual appropriation by town meeting. So, once again, the town of Concord was really on the forefront of creating a parking meter revolving fund. So we had special legislation that was adopted again in 1975 at a time when parking meter revolving funds were not otherwise an allowed revolving fund under Mass General Law. So we had a special legislation. But then over time, I think Mass General Law catches up to what we're doing here. And now we need to just reauthorize the same type of fund under the most current statute that is available to municipalities to operate the fund. So regardless of what happens with the ARPA funding and whether or not we have to, on a one-time basis, pull the parking meter program out from the revolving fund because we don't have receipts to operate it, run it through the general fund. So regardless, we need to reestablish the revolving fund because if not in fiscal 22, for sure in fiscal 23, assuming we continue to have parking meters, we will want to segregate these receipts and restrict them to the operation of the program.
Thank you, Carrie. I see, Parashar, you have a question for Carrie?
Yeah, I'm curious. What happens if the article doesn't pass?
So if the article does not pass, then the receipts are receipts of the general fund. And if the article does not pass, I believe the intention then would just be to keep the parking management program running as a program of the general fund.
Any other questions from the Finance Committee? Any questions from the public?
Nope.
Seeing none. Carrie, you want to move right on to the annual appropriation of parking meter receipts?
Sure. So this article seeks town meeting appropriation of $400,000 from parking meter receipts to fund expenses related to parking management, parking enforcement, or public transportation initiatives in fiscal 22. Next slide. Authorized under the former bylaw, parking meter receipts did not require annual appropriation. The fund now authorized under Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 22C, assuming the last article was approved, does require annual appropriation. The amount available for appropriation is up to 100% of the estimated fund balance as of June 30 of the prior fiscal year. As of June 30, 21, we estimate a total of $400,000 to be available, though some or all of this balance may come from the ARPA grant to replace lost revenue. So if we don't receive the ARPA grant or we don't decide to dedicate some of those revenues to this purpose, we won't be moving this article. But for the purposes of this quick presentation, we're going to assume that we received the funds and we're moving forward with this article. Slide 3, please. This slide shows historical revenue, expense, and fund balance for the parking meter fund for the period of fiscal 16 through 20. The green line represents revenue, the red expense, and the blue line represents fund balance. Prior to fiscal 19, revenue had always met or exceeded expenses. In fiscal 19, there were some extraordinary and one-time expenses charged to the fund. And but for these expenses, revenue would have been sufficient to cover the expenses in that particular year. Next slide. However, the pandemic has hit this fund hard. Parking meters, the largest source of revenue for the fund, were shut off during the pandemic and have only recently been turned back on. But the program has still continued to accrue expenses, the largest of which is for meter maintenance. Next slide. This slide provides historical expenditure data by category for fiscal 16 to 20, so more detail than what we saw 2 slides ago, and includes estimated expenditure level for both fiscal 21 and 22. The largest expense categories are for personnel, which funds the sworn officers assigned to parking enforcement, and for operations and maintenance, which includes the meter maintenance contract, striping of parking spaces, both curbside and in public and commuter parking lots. For fiscal 21, due to restricted revenue, the only expenses intended to be charged to the fund are for the contractual costs. Personnel expenses typically charged here will be borne by the police department budget. The fiscal 22 budget appropriation for this fund is set at $400,000, which is generally in line with the level of expenditure seen in the past years. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the Finance Committee for Carrie on this article? Seeing none, any questions from the public?
There is a question from Pamela Dritt, if we can promote Pamela.
Ellen.
Pamela, 13 Concord Green. I was just curious as to what the unusual expenses were in 2018 that caused the revenues to exceed, the expenses to exceed the revenues.
Sure. So generally associated with the installation of the new parking meters, there were some additional costs. We had some trouble bringing the parking meters online. We had a lot of equipment that burned out because of the lack of cell service. I'm sorry, this is not a program that I work with a whole lot of. Do we have anybody on here?
No, I do think, based on what I was told when I started, I think it was a lot of meter upgrades and a lot of contractual, a revised contract. The meters are in part they're in part powered by solar, and also rely on cellular service, so credit cards can be used. And some of the placing of the trees and the diminished cellular capacity made it so the meters would burn out and have a higher replacement rate. They are, and I think I know you were at that presentation, Pamela. I think you heard me describe the parking meters as mini computers that sit on poles outside 365 days a year. That is essentially what they are. And so their purchase and replacement is expensive.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Any other questions from the public?
No, Mary.
Great. Okay, thank you, Carrie. We're moving on now to Article 17, Appropriate Funds for Affordable Housing. And I believe the sponsor here is Linda Escobedo. Linda, are you still with us? Chris, can you make Linda a panelist, please? There she is.
Okay, there we are. All right. Hi.
Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Linda Escobedo. I'm chair of the Concord Select Board. This Article 17 to appropriate funds for affordable housing development is sponsored by the Select Board and reads as follows. To determine whether the town will vote to raise and appropriate or transfer from free cash the sum of $500,000 for the purpose of developing or supporting affordable housing within the town to be expended and under the direction of the town manager on such terms and conditions as the Select Board may determine, including transferring the funds to the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust or take any other action thereto. I'd like to first, so the next slide, yes, good. I'd like to first provide a little bit of history for those who may not be familiar with the 2019 annual town meeting actions that were taken related to this warrant article. 2 articles passed. So first, let me say that thanks in large part to the past work of the Affordable Housing Funding Committee and the housing groups in town. A multi-year strategy resulted in 2 articles that were passed as home rule petitions and are currently before the state legislature for approval. A real estate transfer fee and a building permit surcharge with the intent of providing consistent future revenue stream for affordable housing. If passed, these articles will come back to a future town meeting for approval. At the 2019 meeting, there were also 2 other articles passed, one an affordable housing appropriation and the acceptance of the state statute to develop a municipal affordable housing trust fund, both of which anticipated further action at future town meetings. I'll also comment that since 2019, there are a number of other communities that have also filed home rule petitions with the legislature for funding in the categories of real estate transfer fee, and is gaining increasing attention from state legislatures to address these or some other mechanism for providing some local affordable housing fund assistance. Both the committee's report that I just referred to, as well as the Select Board 2021 goals, board goals, anticipated that, we're on the next slide now, please. Anticipated that this year's request of $500,000 for affordable housing to support affordable housing until the appropriate state legislation is enacted for a previously approved town meeting articles that can generate another consistent revenue source to be appropriated from free cash only when the town's free cash level is above 5% of the annual operating budget. Next slide, please. Continuing with the multi-year strategy envisioned, the 2020 annual town meeting supported and approved an affordable housing appropriation and bylaws for Concord's recently state-approved affordable housing trust. So how has the success of these actions already benefited Concord? During this past year, available funds allowed the town's housing entities, the town manager and the select board, to act immediately on affordable housing opportunities that would otherwise have been lost. Funds provided leverage for significant external funds to create and or preserve state housing inventory counted affordable housing homes. And notably, this appropriation request also addresses the town goals of equity and fairness. I would comment that examples of the actions that the town and the select board were able to act on included a subsidy buy down on a property at Emerson Annex, development soft costs for new construction at 365 Com Ave that will result in the addition of 2 units on the town's SHI, a 930 Main Street Habitat project, which will also result in 2 additional affordable housing units. And all 3 of these projects have used these funds to leverage additional external funds for these projects. As all of us know, affordable housing issues, whether they're subsidized, affordable housing, whether it's subsidized or otherwise, is a major issue for the town. Appropriating these funds is just one of the efforts that the town is pursuing, along with changes to zoning bylaws and other measures that will address the affordable housing issues as well as preserving town character. Next slide, please. We request your support on Article 17. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Linda. Any questions from the Finance Committee? Chris, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes. Linda, can you connect the dots for me between what's been requested here with what was requested through the CPC, which was also for affordable housing? So we have a $500,000 request from free cash, and we have, I think, 233,000 that's going to be funded from CPC. What's the difference?
So with they're different funding sources, and also the availability and the flexibility of when they're available is different. It's a year-long process for CPA funds, CPC decisions, as you know, that have to wait for town meeting, and then those they're vetted and reviewed for over a year, and those funds are not available if voted on at town meeting and approved, are not available until after July 1. So there's a timing issue, but there's also, for those of you who are familiar with all the housing projects in towns that have been accomplished over time, they often require multiple year efforts in piecing together both local sources as well as state and federal sources to make the projects viable. And so funds are needed sometimes up front to leverage other funds, whether they come from the state or the federal government. Sometimes both CPC funds and some additional funding. Maybe CPC doesn't fund the full project or doesn't is looking for other funds to complete the total range of costs that are required for that particular project. So, the housing, affordable housing world typically has to really scramble, I guess, and also go through machinations to get multiple sources of funding for any one project. That's pretty typical.
So the trust fund that we established in advance of getting the home rule petition approved isn't enough. Is that what it is? And so we would expect to continue to see requests coming to CPC as well as being asked to fund the $500,000 until the home rule petition is approved. So that's something that's going to keep happening.
Yeah. I think the answer to that is yes. And the reason is that, as you know, there are multiple categories of projects that come to CPC, and they vary from year to year, and they're making decisions about how they're going to allocate that money to, whether it's recreation or open space or housing or I'm forgetting one of the categories right now, but so you usually have to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I think other people may be surprised by that as well. I sort of thought, we dealt with what was asked for at town meeting with setting up the $500,000. So I was surprised to see a large request coming into CPC as well. But perhaps that's just me, but that surprised me.
Yeah, and like other town projects, whether it be in housing or recreation or open space, sometimes some of these projects are coming back 3 years at a time to CPC because there isn't enough money in 1 year to totally fund a project. So that's another aspect of this.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from the Finance Committee? I have a question. Linda, do you have any idea of how much money is left over from the $1 million that we appropriated during the last 2 years?
So approximately $300 was spent from this most recent year's $500 appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
And the $500,000 from the first year, or, you could say the 300 came from the first year and the second appropriation is still intact. But we just got approval from the recently in the last couple months for the bylaw, Affordable Housing Trust bylaw that was passed at 2020 town meeting and had to be certified at the state level.
Okay,
So the Affordable Housing Trust is just now in a position to finally seat membership and get that committee up and running. So they will need these funds to operate.
Okay, but if I did my arithmetic right, there's $700,000 left over from the $1 million that's already been appropriated. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that was my first question. My second question is this article sponsored by the Select Board or the Concord Housing Development Corporation or the Concord Housing? Who is sponsoring this?
The Select Board is sponsoring this. And as I said, it's consistent with the 2021 Select Board goals. But all of the housing groups did send in letters requesting the Select Board to also be sure to get this on the warrant.
Okay, and my final question is, do you have a feeling for how soon this will be heard at the state level so that we can see if we are successful with our other avenues of revenue to fund this?
So there has been a lot of communication between the town and our legislators on this issue. And last year, I think COVID really, the state legislature had many other things before them. And there were many home rule petitions that did not get acted on last year. We immediately, because we're still, it still came within the time limit, we immediately refiled these 2 home rule petitions for consideration at this year's legislature. We already are aware that they're running behind in assigning bill numbers even to the initial filings. And again, not just these 2 particular home rule petitions, but many. So, all we can do is continue to let our legislators know of our continued interest in getting these acted on.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it last year, it at least did move through several committees. It's just, yeah.
Good to know. Thank you. Any other questions from the Finance Committee? Phil.
Yes. So this is really for Kerry. So if the town approves this 500,000 and the 1 million from Article 8, what does that do to our free cash balance and our percentage?
Yeah, let me just go back to that presentation. Sorry about that. So if both items are approved, then our free cash balance is about $4.9 million or 4.24% of the budget.
Carrie, can you restate that if you add the Cambridge Turnpike numbers to that?
Right. So then if you will recall, I mentioned that we had close to $1.5 million, we had a timing issue. So if you add that back in and assume these 2 articles are approved, you go back to about 6.35 million or 5.5%.
So, Phil, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Any other questions from the Finance Committee?
Mary, I was hoping to make just a quick comment on the housing funding.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think one of the things that I've learned since I've been here is that the town is engaged in it. The town is a party to a number of right of first refusals for affordable housing and a number of techniques for making sure the town is a seat at the table for affordable housing projects have been developed, whether it's our bylaw that's the subject of the lawsuit I mentioned some time ago. And when these things come up, to exercise those rights or to accomplish the goals, they're usually hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. And so I just want to reinforce the idea that even if we do have a balance that we have not spent yet, I do believe it's important to continue to contribute to this effort, because making a meaningful difference in this will be, like I said, something will come along that's opportunistic that will be very, very expensive. And so I just wanted to add my support for that.
Thank you. Carrie, I have a question for you. Are you still there?
I am.
Carrie, if this year, it looks like we're going to be using about $700,000 or $800,000 to fund the town's budget that would otherwise have gone to free cash. Is that correct? Have you done any work around forecasting what you think the free cash balance might be at the end of next fiscal year?
Not yet. We're just starting that work now. I can tell you that our expectation is that we will still be adding to fund balance when we close fiscal 21, even with the amounts of carry forward. Our revenue is very strong. Taxes, the fourth quarter tax bill is due on Monday, and I can tell you we already have 90% of property taxes collected for the year. Our local receipts are coming in strong against our estimates, which are very low, but at least we're meeting our estimates that we set at the beginning of the year. So I do expect that there still will be some add to free cash, but we're not at a point right yet to say how much.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the Finance Committee? Any questions from the public?
We have one from Carlin Reed. If she can be promoted, please.
Hi, Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. Thank you for this. I was looking at the actual text of Article 17, and my question is about who has the authority of designating this fund. Is it under the control of the town manager or under the control of the select board on whether any or all of this fund goes to the Municipal Housing Affordable Trust? That's the question. So delegation of authority.
Good.
Thanks.
Linda, do you want to answer that or?
Well, it reads under the direction of the town manager on such terms and conditions as the select board may determine. And so I think we would be working together on that.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Carla? Thank you. Any other questions from the public on this?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Linda. Let's move on to, we're going to skip the next two, and we're moving on to 42 and 43, unpaid bills and debt rescission. Carrie, you want to take a...
So you will be pleased to hear that no motion is anticipated under either of these articles.
Oh, yes, we are pleased to hear that. Thank you, Carrie. Do I have any other questions from the public? Okay, I need a motion to close the hearing.
Make a motion to close the hearing.
And a second?
Second.
Dee, second. Great. Let's go around. Christine?
Yes.
Myself, Mary Hartman, yes. Dee Ortner?
Yes.
Wade Rubenstein?
Yes.
Brian Taylor?
Yes.
Lois Wassoff? Andrea Zoll?
Yes.
Greg Guriello?
Yes.
Ray Andrews?
Yes.
Parashar Patel?
Yes.
John Hickling?
Yes.
Phil Swain?
Yes.
Dick Jameson?
Yes.
Dean Banfield? Dean was up at 7:30 this morning, so Dean might not be with us right now. So we have enough to adjourn the hearing. So for the public, we're adjourning the hearing. Now we're moving into the regular Finance Committee meeting. You're welcome to stay as long as you want, but the public hearing is officially ended. So FinCom members, I know we agreed that we would stay after the meeting and discuss these articles, and I'm really tired, and I'm wondering if that was a good idea. So I've got a proposal that if we want to go through them and just do the ones that we feel that are not controversial and don't generate a lot of discussion, and we table the ones that require a lot of discussion. Dee.
I think you have to open the meeting.
No, we already have a meeting open.
We closed the meeting, right?
We closed the hearing.
Hearing. So we have to open up
No,
our,
we opened the meeting before we opened the hearing.
okay.
We opened the meeting, then we opened a hearing, then we closed the hearing, so we're still in the meeting.
Thank you.
So my proposal is, again, to go down these and see, and if we start generating a lot of discussion and we need to talk about it some more, we table it to a night when we don't have as many of these articles to get through, so we can have a good discussion instead of just tired people wanting to move on. Okay? Does that sound okay with everybody? We don't need a motion?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good. Okay, I'm looking at the very first article here, meeting procedure. We sponsored that, so I assume we're going to recommend affirmative action.
Yes.
Okay. So I will take a vote on all these later, okay, rather than one at a time. The second one is Article 4, again, the Finance Committee Guideline publication. This was sponsored by FinCom. I'm assuming we're going to recommend affirmative action. Right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Before I go any further, for each of these articles, we should write something up for the FinCom report. So I am going to ask people to volunteer for these. For this article and for Article 3 and Article 4, I will write something for the FinCom report, very brief, saying why the Finance Committee is recommending affirmative action. The next article is Article 5, ratify Personnel Board classification actions. Now, this is, I think, something Dee you brought up earlier. So do you want to?
I think this one we should defer. I have the same questions that Dee did around why are we sponsoring this one? Why is it here? We don't do work, on personnel levels or payroll. We look at the overall budget in total. So
we're not sponsoring it, though.
Yeah, just
okay. Well, why are we? But some of them we don't take action on. So this one to me is I don't know why this one's in our court.
To me,
it's got numbers in it.
We can just vote no action. Did you?
We can
vote no position.
Where was it?
No
before?
position.
In the past, we've always said affirmative action, and I think the thinking behind that was similar to the CPC articles. We trust that committee has done the work, and
yeah. But we have an observer on CPC. I don't know that do we have an observer there that can speak to it?
No.
Okay. So anyway, that's I don't know. If everybody else, that's just my thought. If everybody else is okay with it, keep going.
That's correct.
Well, we can maybe knock this out now. Do I have a motion to take a no position on here? Is that what people want to do?
Can I just ask a question? I mean, is this something that by tradition we've been supporting these warrants?
Yes.
So I guess if we take a no action, I think we should fully discuss it, because otherwise it may or may not send the wrong signal to folks. And I guess, so I mean, I'm in favor of just supporting it and moving on, because it seems relatively perfunctory. And I would suggest maybe post-meeting, we have a conversation about which articles in the future we may or may not actually want to take action on.
I'm hearing we should defer this because we need to discuss it more amongst ourselves.
Right. I agree.
So let's defer that, okay? The next one is the classification and compensation plan for regular status positions.
Defer.
I think that's like 5.
So
Yeah, it's the same.
They kind of go together, so we'll defer that. Use of free cash.
I think it's our article. We thought about it. We recommend it.
Yeah.
Any objections to that? Okay, good. Article 9, budget line item adjustments.
Mary, who wants to write up, as long as do you want to take use of free cash, or do you want to assign it to one of the rest of us?
I would be willing to have a volunteer to write this.
Dean.
I don't think we can volunteer. Well, I like it.
Someone to do something.
The guy who's not here.
You turn off your camera.
Thank you, Lois. I forgot to get that. Do I have a volunteer to write something up about why the Finance Committee recommends affirmative action on Article 8? This is pretty boilerplate.
This is an easy one. I would say
Greg, thank
someone.
you. Greg, thank you. Okay. Article 9, the budget line item adjustments. That's moving money from one account to another. Is this something do we need to discuss and defer?
We should defer this one.
I think we should defer it because this incorporates some elements that are controversial, even though I don't think that means that there's necessarily a problem with it. So I think it merits a conversation.
Good.
I agree.
Okay, good. We'll defer that. Fine. The town manager's budget.
Yes.
This is affirmative action since we've already discussed this.
We've already decided, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so this is affirmative action. And I believe I've got to write this up because I'm the liaison to the select board. The OPEB trust fund appropriation. God, this is pretty boilerplate as well, isn't this?
Really, I don't think this is controversial at all.
I don't either. I'm thinking affirmative action unless I have any objections.
Agree.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. OPEB trust fund expense, again, affirmative action unless I see any objections.
Correct.
Okay. And I don't even think we have to write this up unless somebody wants to volunteer to write this up.
If we think we need it, I'll volunteer to
work
with Karen to produce one paragraph.
Great.
It just explains why we have to do that. It's basically in Carrie's presentation. I think it's just restating in sentence form a couple of the bullet points in Carrie's presentation.
Fine. Thank you, Lois. Okay, I'm looking at the capital improvement and debt plan. This was Kate Hodges talked to us about this. Is this something do we need to discuss this? We've talked about this before. Kate came and talked to us before. I don't think anything we heard tonight was new.
No, I think we're fine with this.
I'm okay with it.
I think, okay, so I'm going to recommend affirmative action unless someone wants to object, and that's okay. We can talk about it later. Affirmative action? Okay. Yeah. And somebody needs to write this up.
You know, do we really need to write this up? She has such a lengthy presentation. I'm not sure what we add to it.
It's our response, not adding to it. It's what FinCom's response is.
Yeah. Exactly. It's explaining why we're recommending affirmative action. Very, very, very short. We don't have to get into any of the details. Do I have a volunteer to write that up?
I'll take it.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, authorized expenditures of revolving funds. Affirmative action.
Yes.
That was the 4, right? The 4 revolving funds.
I'm
just trying to look at
Yes, the 4.
Thank you.
Again, affirmative action, unless I hear any objections. I don't think we need a write-up for that unless, Lois, you want
to? I want to email me her presentations and I can.
Let me see, where am I?
15.
Establishment of the parking meter fund and the repeal of the parking meter revolving fund. Again, I'm thinking this is perfunctory and it would be affirmative action. Any objections?
Agree.
Great. Okay, we should have somebody write this up and somebody who understands it really well.
Why can't we just say we support it? I mean,
I think,
there's nobody here understands the parking meter.
I mean, it sounds like it's just. It sounds like it's just to come up to the latest standard, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
It's just, it's one of those changes that's being made to bring us into compliance with changes. And
so we could say that.
But actually, there's a couple of those. We could group them, we say yes, 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 and have one paragraph that says this brings us into compliance.
This does not have to be long. It's just why we're recommending affirmative action, and it's to bring us up to compliance with latest Mass General Law, something like that.
Well, I think we've just done it. So the question is, which one of us wants to be responsible?
You do, Lois.
I will. I'll do it.
Thank you. Okay. The next one is the annual appropriation of parking meter receipts. Again, this seems like affirmative action to me.
And that one's tentative. It only happens if they get the ARRP money.
Good point. Good point. Yep. Appropriation funds for affordable housing development. I'm thinking that this is something we need to defer.
Agreed.
I agree.
I'm skipping the 2 senior means. I'm going to unpaid bills and debt recession, which we don't have. So, okay, let me recap what we just agreed to, I think. For the meeting procedure, we're going to recommend affirmative action. I'll write up something very brief. For the Finance Committee guideline publication, affirmative action, I'll write up something very brief. Ratify personnel, we're going to defer that. Classification and compensation, we're going to defer that. Use of free cash, affirmative action. Greg, you're going to write up something about that. FY21 budget line adjustments, we're deferring. FY22 budget, affirmative action, I'll write up something. OPEB, trust fund appropriation, affirmative action. Lois will write something brief. OPEB trust fund expense, affirmative action. Lois. Capital improvement and debt plan, affirmative action. Brian's going to write something quickly or briefly, succinctly. Authorize expenditures or revolving fund, affirmative action. Lois. Establishment of parking meter fund, affirmative action. Lois. Appropriated annual appropriation of parking meter receipts, affirmative if we need it. Appropriate funds for affordable housing, we're deferring that. We're done. So we've got some to defer until our next hearing. The other thing on our agenda was a discussion of the Concord Middle School. Dean and I both attended that meeting this morning. They read our letter, they discussed it. I think we definitely had an impact, but I don't think there's anything more for us to do right now. Anything else? Oh, wait, I need a motion. I need a motion that what I just said captures what we voted. So do I have a motion that basically allows us to vote on all of what I just went through?
So moved.
I'll make that motion. I'm going to rewind and say I am making a motion that we recommend affirmative. You see what I'm saying? I hope.
Yes.
Anita, am I being legal now?
You're fine. Yes, you're fine.
Thank you. Can I have a second on that?
Second.
Okay, I'm going to go around. Christine?
Yes.
Myself, Mary Hartman, yes. Dee Ortner?
Yes.
Wade Rubenstein?
Yes.
Brian Taylor?
Yes.
Lois Wassoff?
Yes.
Andrea Zoll?
Yes.
Greg Goriello?
Yes.
Ray Andrews?
Yes.
Parashar Patel?
Yes.
Don Hickling?
Yes.
Vic Jameson?
Yes.
Phil Swain?
Sorry. Yes.
Very good. Motion passes unanimously, and I so declare. Do we have anything else that we need to talk about, or can we have a motion? Thank you very much. This is a long meeting.
You want citizen comments, Mary?
Oh, thank you. Are there any? I don't see any.
I don't see any.
Do you see any, Chris?
I don't. I just want to make sure because we still have 32 folks on the line and make sure there was no questions. Oh, wait. Sorry. I got one. There's one. Hold on. Oh.
Just a thank you.
Very important.
Stephen Bader.
You're welcome, Stephen. You're welcome. Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Before we do that,
Yes.
Are you going to say that the other articles that we did not take position on tonight, we will address at the May 6th meeting?
I don't know yet, Dee, because I would have to look at that agenda and the following agenda and see which
Okay.
night I think we'll have more energy.
They will be deferred to a future meeting.
Yes, either May
Okay.
6th or May 11th.
I have a question. Is there going to be any more discussion coming back to us regarding the middle school project?
Dean and I went to the meeting this morning.
Right.
They discussed our letter. I think they took it very seriously, and they were discussing. I mean, it's no decisions were made today, no votes were made today, but I really believe that we had a positive influence on their deliberations. I think, as Dr. Hunter said, it's messy, and it's still not, that's to be expected. So I feel like we had an influence, but I feel like now it's our time to not to move back for a minute now, for a while. But we're going to keep on top of that. So thank you for that, India. Thank you for that question. And Dean's still not here, so he can't contradict what I just said. But I'm pretty sure it was accurate. Any other questions that we should talk about?
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, thank you, Dean.
We had one comment.
I get myself unpictured or whatever. I can't get my camera on.
Well, just one
Dean
comment.
just woke up.
Really? He did. Okay.
That was a tough meeting.
Dean, do you want to add anything to what I said about the middle school building committee meeting today?
I think the school committee has, they still have a good amount of work ahead of them. They are on an aggressive schedule. That's the one thing that I think still concerns me, and that is that they anticipate voting on a full space plan by May 10th, which is not far away. There's not a lot of time for them to, revisit any decisions that they've made. Today's meeting did not cause them to revisit any of their decisions. One of the things that was in our letter, with the very first point of our letter, was that they were supposed to be revisiting their decision to vote a not to exceed budget of 108 million, and they did not take any action even close to that. So that, there's still some concern there that they're still sitting with that high budget that they voted. So, yeah, but I think Mary's correct that they absolutely took our letter very seriously, and whether they change the budget limit or not, I think it may have a very salutary effect on the decisions that they then subsequently do make. So I think it'll be, they took it seriously. So that's good.
I'm hoping other boards and committees weigh in on this as well before things are put into, before the schematic design becomes harder and harder to change. So I'm hoping that other boards weigh in. But I think we've done what we can. Okay.
Madam Chair, I move adjournment.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Christine Reynolds.
Yes.
Mary Hartman, yes. Dee Ortner?
Yes.
Wade Rubenstein?
Yes.
Brian Taylor?
Yes.
Lois Wassoff?
Yes.
Andrea Zoll?
Yes.
Greg Goriello?
Yes.
Ray Andrews?
Yes.
Parashar Patel?
Yes.
John Hickling?
Yes.
Dick Jameson?
Yes.
Phil Swain?
Yes.
Dean Banfield?
Yes.
It's unanimous, and the chair so declares. Thank you very much. It's been a long night. You've done some good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.